Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto returned to Konoha for the Chunin exams part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Our story begins in another land, not so long ago. The hidden village of Konoha suffered major losses when the Kyuubi no Kitsune attacked their village. The demon fox left nothing alive during its attack. The beast was so strong, the village's leader, the Yondaime Hokage, had to sacrifice himself in order to seal the Kyuubi inside an infant child. The child gained 3 whisker-like marks on his cheeks due to the demon's chakra. But alas, our story takes place 4 years after these events. We join 4 people outside the gates of Konoha. 3 were wearing black cloaks with red clouds decorating them. On their heads was Hetaiide of Amegakure. One of them was a spiky orange-haired man that was easily 6'3". He had a smile on his face that no one, not even those accompanying him, knew why it was there. To his left was a red-headed man whose bangs were covering his eyes and he stood at 5'10". His face was a blank, only those that knew him could tell he was nervous. On the orange-haired man's right was a blue-haired woman with a flower in her hair, walked hand in hand with the orange-haired man. Ahead of them was a tall, white-haired man whose hair was long and held in a ponytail that easily reached past his lower back. He kept his bangs out of his face with his horned Hetaiide. On it was the kanji for Toad Sage. The blue-haired woman looked ahead of her at the white-haired man. "Sensei, is this really necessary?" she asked. The man nodded. "Konan, it's the least I can do," he said. "After all, you all just defeated Hanzo and his forces. That's no easy feat, and coming from me, that's saying something." "I'm just glad we can work on helping aim now," the orange-haired man said. The redeed next to him let a small smile grace his face. "I agree, Yahiko," he said, "but Sensei, do you really think making a treaty with Konoha so early is a good idea? I mean, oh come now, Nagato." The man said, "Are you telling me you don't trust the one and all-powerful great Toad Sage, Jiraiya?" "That's exactly what he's saying, Iro-sensei," Yahiko muttered. Jiraiya deflated. "Come on, Yahiko," he grumbled, "I thought I convinced you not to call me that. And I will once you stop writing those pornographic excuses for books," Yahiko replied. Jiraiya stuck his tongue out at the man, causing Konan to chuckle. "Real mature sensei," Nagato muttered, "even Yahiko is acting his age. Can't you do the same for once?" Yahiko burst out laughing at the distraught look on his sensei's face. Before Jiraiya could retort, the guard at the gate approached the 4. "Halt, identification please," he said. The 4 of them all pulled their IDs out and presented them before entering the village. "Alright, I'll go see the Hokage, why don't you 3 go explore the village?" Jiraiya said, heading towards the Hokage tower. Yahiko grinned. "Just don't go researching, Iro-sensei," he said, making Jiraiya face fault. He laughed as he led his other 2 companions towards the living district. The village looked prosperous to them. Smiling faces around every corner, kind children, all in all, it was exactly how the 3 of them wanted AIM to be like. Yahiko allowed his grin to grow to blinding proportions, attracting attention from many of the opposite sex and making Konan walk closer to him. Nagato looked around the village using his gifted eyesight. He was always amazed at what his Rinnegan could pick up apart from his normal eyesight. That's how he saw what made him freeze in his tracks. In the alleyway, a small form was limping to a dumpster and trying to climb into it. Curious, Nagato strayed from his friends towards the alley. Coming closer, he saw a small child with ragged clothes and blonde hair digging through a dumpster. "Child," he said, getting said child's attention. Seeing his face made the usually quiet man gasp in shock. The poor boy, as he found the child to be one, had bruises on his cheek and a swollen lip. Dried blood was seen on the boy's face and clothes. The boy fell on his butt and started scooting away from the stranger. I sorry," he whimpered out, don't hurt me. Please. I sorry." Nagato frowned. He instantly knew the boy was beaten recently, as the bruises and blood was clearly not self-inflicted. The question is why? Why would anyone hurt a child? Slowly approaching the boy, Nagato held his hands out in an open manner and said quietly, "It's okay, child. I mean you no harm. Who did this to you? Where are your parents?" The boy shook with fear and eyed him with fear, "And no rents. I've been lone forever." Nagato felt his heart reach out to the boy. He may not have had an easy time being in the village that killed his parents, but he could see this boy had been through more than he could ever admit to have gone through. He heard footsteps approaching and used his enhanced vision to see Konan and Yahiko approaching. "Hey Nagato. Would you run a flick at it?" Yahiko's voice died off as he saw Nagato hold a hand out, signaling them to stay back. He turned back around. "It's okay, boy," Nagato continued, "I won't hurt you. Come here. Let me help." Nagato heard his friend's gasp as the blonde slowly inched out into the light. Konan took another step forward, alerting the boy to her presence. He froze mid-step and started to back up. "It's okay, child," Nagato said quietly, "she's a friend. Come on, it's okay." The blonde slowly approached again, coming closer with each step. Eventually, he came close enough to Nagato that he could lightly grip his hand. Nagato knelt down to his level and looked over to his friends, signaling them it was okay to approach. Yahiko knelt next to Nagato and smiled at the blonde. "Hey kiddo," he said quietly, "I'm Yahiko, the redeed you were talking to is Nagato, and the pretty blue-haired girl is Konan. What's your name?" The blonde let a small smile on his face, "Uzumaki Naruto." Nagato's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He smiled slightly at the child, "Hello Naruto. It's a pleasure to meet you." Konan knelt on Nagato's other side and frowned, "Are you okay? Does it hurt anywhere?" Naruto's smile dimmed slightly and he looked at the ground, "Leg hurts." Konan held her arms open, "Come here, Naruto. Let's get you to a hospital." Naruto looked from her arms to her face and slowly came into her arms. Konan picked him up carefully and held him in a cross of a hug and cradling him. Yahiko and Nagato followed behind Konan as she and Naruto talked quietly. Yahiko leaned closer to Nagato. "I'm sure you've noticed it by now," he whispered. Nagato nodded. As Konan and Naruto walked through the streets, the people glared at them. "Why are they glaring at Konan?" Yahiko asked, "They don't know her." "I believe that Konan isn't the one they are directing their glares at," Nagato muttered. Yahiko scowled. "What could have he done? He can't be older than 4, the orange shinobi grumbled. Nagato turned his attention to a flash of black. "It seems not only the villagers are watching the boy," Nagato mused. Yahiko nodded. "I saw him too," he said, "one of them with a weasel mask seemed to have an internal battle with himself on something." "I suggest you go take this up with the Hokage," Nagato said. Yahiko looked ahead at Konan and hesitated. "I will not leave their side, Yahiko," Nagato said, reassuring his friend's fears. Yahiko grinned. "You know, you're not as dark as you make yourself out to be, Nagato," he said before vanishing in a sushine of water. Nagato sped up so that he was next to Konan. "Yahiko is going to meet up with Sensei and the Hokage," he informed her. She nodded and Naruto cocked his head. "Aiko is gonna meet Gigi?" he asked. Nagato instantly realized who he was calling grandfather and nodded. "Yes, now let's continue to the hospital," he replied. "Are you telling me," Konan said with her eyes closed and a tick appearing on her head, "that every available room in this hospital is occupied and you can't heal a boy that has been beaten to near death?" "Yes," the nurse behind the desk said, "we don't have any rooms for that thing." Then Konan repeated, "That thing is a child that could very well be in critical condition." "Listen," the nurse said, "I can understand that you're from a village, so you probably don't already know but that thing is a demon. It's dangerous so you Twento." Her voice left her as the amount of killing intent in the room sucked all the air from the vicinity. The blue-haired woman in front of her was glaring holes through her head and the wall behind her. "He is a child of this village," Konan said, "have you even considered that?" Konan, Jiraiya said from behind her. Next to him was a kind-looking elder in red and white robes and a matching hat. He chuckled. Now, Jiraiya," he said, "although I'm not pleased about her threatening my hospital staff, she has every right to. Now, Miss Kaiuoki, I believe we asked for a room for little Naruto-kun." The nurse nodded and bowed, "Hi, Hokage-sama." A few moments later, the boy was now sleeping in the hospital bed snuggled into Konan's side. Konan was absently running her hands through Naruto's messy blonde locks. Jiraiya smiled at the motherly side of his student and looked over at the brooding Yahiko. Yahiko was glaring out the window of the hospital room. Nagato and Sarutobi were talking quietly amongst themselves next to the bed, with Konan occasionally jumping in. Naturally, the subject of their conversation was the small blonde heir to the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans. Jiraiya scowled at the memory when Sarutobi informed him how his godson was treated. Yahiko turned to his sensei and said, "Jiraiya, are you just going to leave him here?" Jiraiya sighed, "I don't seem to have any other choice, Yahiko. If I could take him with me, I would, don't get me wrong. But Sarutobi-sensei has it under con." "Sensei, shut up," Yahiko snarled, "that boy had his left leg sliced open and was covered in his own blood and bruises. Kami knows that the only reason he's alive that it's his tenant's will to live. You know as well as I do that if I were to take him with me, the dangers would be. And you think that it won't be as worse here? These people loathe him, Jiraiya. They aren't going to follow the Yandame's wishes no matter what law your sensei puts down," Yahiko said in a growl, "and speaking of your sensei, what exactly has he done to help the boy?" "Now listen here, Yahiko," Jiraiya started. Yahiko cut him off, alerting everyone to their conversation. "No, you listen, Jiraiya," he shouted, "you expect me to believe that the villagers and shinobi will just stop attacking him after being thrown in jail for what? 3 days. 3 fucking days for nearly killing a child." "Yahiko," Sarutobi tried to interject, but Yahiko cut him off. "You stay out of this. You have the gall to tell me you were doing everything in your power to help the boy, but were you really?" he said, glaring at the Hokage. "Do you know how long he's been out of the happy and caring orphanage you put him in? Half a year. He's been on the streets fending for himself for half a year. You want to keep lying to yourself about helping him, fine. But I will not stand by leaving a child, the son of your yondaime nonetheless a circumflex Eurosia. I figured it out, it's pretty damn hard not to when the picture in your office looks just like him a circumflex Euros out on the streets. Yahiko? Jiraiya shouted. Yahiko turned to glare at his sensei. Jiraiya frowned. Take a walk, Gaki, he ordered. Yahiko took in a deep breath and walked to the door before pausing and looking over his shoulder. I'm not going to apologize, he informed the room, I'm right and you all know it. He left the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Konan was holding Naruto's sleeping form close to her, the blonde simply snuggled closer to the warmth he'd never felt before. Nagato sighed. Forgive him, Hokage Dono, he said, Yahiko, although kind and cunning, has a temper like our sensei. Hey. Jiraiya cried, I do not have a temper. Oh you do and you know it, Tsurutobi said, causing Jiraiya to collapse in despair, all is forgiven, Nagato-san. He is right, he have been neglecting Naruto-kun. I would adopt him, but the damn council is making it harder for me to help him. Part of me wishes he could be taken away from Harabit, it's his home. It was quiet for a moment before Konan spoke up, what if I adopted him? The Hokage looked up, what? I'm not a villager so your laws don't apply to me as much as they do your shinobi, she said before looking down at the boy, and knowing what he has to go through as a Jinchuriki he can't in my right mind leave him to such a fate. Tsurutobi looked at her, are you serious? You've just met him today. She won't be alone in raising him, Hokage Dono, Nagato said, Yahiko and I will be assisting her every step of the way. I'll check on him and the seal every now and then, Jiraiya said, I'm the kid's godfather after all. Tsurutobi smiled, I'll get the papers and the scrolls his parents left him. At night, Yahiko and Konan left Konoha with their adopted son Uzumaki Naruto. The boy's uncle, Nagato, carried a small bag containing the family scrolls that belonged to the boy. Are you comfortable, Naruto-kun? Konan asked the boy she carried in her arms. Naruto nodded and yawned, exhausted from his experiences and the excitement of finally having a family. I'm sleepy Hiko, how much longer till we're a name? Naruto asked. It'll be a few days, Naruto, Yahiko replied smiling, we'll stop along the way at a few villages so you can get some clothes. Hokage Dono gave us quite a bit of money to use on you. Okay, Naruto said before he once again drifted off to sleep. Days later, Konoha, the demon child hasn't been seen in a while, a councilman said to Tsurutobi, is it finally dead? Tsurutobi huffed and blew out a puff of smoke, he died from wounds the villagers bestowed upon him. The council shared different expressions. Danzo, Hamura and Kaharu all smiled. The civilian council members excused themselves and left to announce to the villagers that the demon was dead. Half of the clan heads joined them, while the Akamichi, Nara and Inyazuka clan had all bowed their heads in sorrow. They each had been close to the boy's parents, through work or not, and were among the few that volunteered to take the child in. For the next week, villagers of Konoha celebrated the death of the Kyuubi, and the Sandaime Hokage fell into a depression that could only be healed by the arrival of Jiraiya, with good news of Naruto. Tsurutobi Hiruzen looked to the mountain that contained his predecessors' and successors' faces. One thought ran through his mind as he looked at the face of the yondaime. Damn me if I haven't failed you, Minato, I hope you can forgive me. Naga. Naruto squealed as Nagato picked him up from the roof of a department store. Nagato sighed. Hami, Naruto, he said, do you know how worried Konan and Yahiko were? How worried I was. You said play hide and seek. Naruto countered with the logic of a 4-year-old, hi, you seek. I expected you to stay in the hotel, Nagato said clapping a hand over his face. He locked his Rinnegan eyes on the cerulean blue that belonged to the blonde. You mad? Naruto asked under the gaze of his uncle's Taijutsu. Nagato sighed and set Naruto on the ground. I'm not mad, Ruto, Nagato said ruffling the boy's hair, but your mother is going to blow a gasket. Dusan mad too. Nagato chuckled and picked the blonde up. Knowing Yahiko, he'd just simply stay quiet and then boast about your escape later, he told his nephew who giggled. Unfortunately, he did not expect to be thrown under the bus by Naruto. Naga wanted to play. I played. Naruto explained after Konan had finished squeezing the life out of him and put him under her glare. Konan's gaze turned to Nagato. Yahiko, take Naruto-kun for a walk, Konan said to Yahiko. Yahiko nodded and guided the boy from the room. As soon as Yahiko shut the door, Nagato wished that they had stayed behind as witnesses. Now, Konan, Nagato said before he was surrounded by Konan's chakra-infused paper, forming a tight cocoon. Don't you Konan me, Nagato, she replied, why did you tell Naruto you'd play hide and seek with him? Do you know what could have happened to him? He's only 4. I can explain, Nagato wheezed out as the paper tightened. Start explaining, Konan said. How'd you do it, kiddo? Yahiko asked as he carried Naruto on his shoulders, no one can escape the crybaby's Rinnegan. Not even Iro-sensei. No, Tusan, Naruto said, Nara said go hide while he covered his eyes. I ran out the door and knocked into some lady, she tried to stop me from falling down a chute, but I was too far. I turned around and landed on my feet, so then I ran. How'd you get on the roof, kiddo? Yahiko asked. Found a ladder, climbed it and played on the roof. Ladder was funny looking though, Naruto said. Yahiko raised an eyebrow. Care to explain? He asked. The ladder was all wavy, like it was a ghost or something, Naruto replied. Felt funny too. Felt like a windy day and like Jiji's tickling froggy. Is that so? Yahiko muttered. He'd heard of an ability like this not too long ago from an ally to the AIM trio. I wonder if couldn't possibly have Arashi no Marathon again if he's from the Uzumaki clan. Dusan. Naruto shouted and tugged on his hair, causing Yahiko to drift from his thoughts. Ow. Naruto. Yahiko cried. He lifted the boy from his shoulders and set him on the ground. Would you pull on my hair? He asked the young blonde. The boy pointed to his left and Yahiko turned to look to see a raiment stand. Oh Hawk, let's eat then, Yahiko said. Naruto cheered and led his father into the stand. Time skip. 9 years later. Sarutobi Hiruzen smiled as he looked into his crystal ball. It's been nearly a decade, let's see if he'll return to Konoha. The 14-year-old blonde walked through the streets of Konoha. To think he actually lived in this excuse for a shinobi village made him sick. And what upset him more were the looks he was getting from the females his age, attraction, lust, intrigued, and confused. The looks he was getting from adults downright pissed him off. Getting looks of shock, as if he had actually died and come back to destroy them. Well, maybe that last part wasn't entirely inaccurate. He shook his head to rid himself of the dark thought from his tenant. Back on the subject of the girls near his age, he knew he should have listened to his friend Homozu. The kid wasn't the smartest genin in all of AIM for no reason. He cursed himself for his choice in wearing just his orange overcoat with blue flames adorning the edgings at the bottom and the sleeves that barely covered his upper arm. Add the blue image of a smiling face of a fox with 9 swirling rings around it and he looked like a character from a television show. Below the image of the fox were the kanji for Prince of AIM and above it was the kanji for awesome. He stopped and looked at himself in a mirrored window of a store. Blonde spiky hair similar to his adoptive Tusan and his Jiji that reached past his shoulders, his AIM headband holding his bangs out of his face. A toned upper body revealed due to his lack of a shirt. He instead chose to just wear his black bandana that loosely hung around his neck with the small red clouds that were connected to his family's stance in AIM. He had navy blue cargo pants on with the bottoms taped around his ankle, giving them a billowed look. Aside from the tape around the soles of his feet, they were bare as the day he was born. He sighed as he tightened the strap of his kunai holster on his left leg. He turned to look up at the shadow he noticed in the corner of the mirror. You know, Ryu, he said, following me is not what I had in mind. You could have just asked to come with me when I told Uncle I was going out to see the village. The boy with combed silver hair jumped down next to him. The boy locked his brown eyes on the blonde. In return, the blonde looked his friend over. Ryu Hoedo, or just Ryu, as he doesn't go by anything other than his clan name, comes from an assassination clan. They once shared a rivalry with the Haddock clan of Konoha and they shared a heritage. Haddock Ryu left the Haddock clan and started his own clan in the Land of Rain. Ryu looked like the second coming of his clan originator. He had his long silver hair combed back and from his head a black cloth with red clouds hung over his left ear. His unnaturally chiseled jaw had a scar running along it from one of their missions. Ryu wore a black sleeveless shirt with a white sash going across his chest and right shoulder. The sash hid seals that contained various weapons including his prized shinai. His choice in pants were very similar to the blonde's, the only difference is that he didn't have custom scroll slips sewn in them. And he wore the traditional covered sandals on his feet. You know, Uzumaki, he said, if you'd have listened to Homozu earlier. I know, Naruto replied waving him off, it's not like I haven't seen enough looks from the girls in AIM. I told you that you should have taken the AIM daimyo up on his offer to marry his sister, Ryu said. Naruto grinned. And actually become the Prince of AIM? Screw that, he replied, I wouldn't be able to continue being a shinobi. And you know how much I hate being waited on. Amen to that, Ryu said, you up for some ramen? I saw a stand a while back and it looks like it could use a good customer. Did you seriously just ask me, Uzumaki AIM Naruto, if I was up for some ramen? Naruto asked his friend. Ryu smacked himself in the face. Let's just go, he said turning to leave, you're buying. Yeah, whatever, Naruto replied, following his friend. As they walked they noticed the Anbu following them doubled despite their attempts to hide. Should we even tell them that we know they're there? Naruto asked quietly. Ryu smirked. Are you talking about the Anbu or the girls? He retorted. Naruto scrunched his eyebrows together in confusion. What do you mean? He asked his friend. The silver-haired genin sighed and pointed over his shoulder. 3 behind us. One's a platinum blonde, Kumonin, the other 2 are Konoha, he explained. They bumped into a tall jonin reading an orange book. Naruto gained a tick mark. Boy. You're reading the Icha. He cried at the jonin, freakin' watch where you're going. You can't talk to Kakashi sensei like that. A pink-haired girl shrieked. Naruto settled a glare on her and the raven-haired boy next to her before looking back at the silver-haired man that was reading the book. The silver-haired man in question looked down from his book at the two he bumped into. His eye widened as he saw the reincarnation of his sensei and of his traitorous ancestor. Ryu's eyes also widened before returning to their neutral state. "Uzumaki," he said under his breath, "let it be. He's a Haddock." Naruto froze and looked at his friend. He looked between the two and then nodded his head at the Jonin. "Our apologies, Haddock-san," Naruto said, "pardon us." Naruto and Ryu walked past the stunned Jonin. The raven-haired boy and pink-haired girl looked up at their sensei. "Sensei?" the girl asked. Kakashi turned around to face her. "I'm okay, Sakura. You two need to watch out for them in the exam," he said. The two genin looked up at their sensei in confusion before following him to their training ground. "Hello and welcome to Ichiraku's," a brown-haired girl said with her back turned to the two boys. "I'll be with you in a minute." Naruto and Ryu sat down in the seats near the stand and Naruto drummed his fingers in impatience. Come on," he muttered. Ryu sighed. "Give her a second, Naruto," he said. The brown-haired girl froze. She turned and locked her eyes on the blonde and stared at him. She had to resist the urge to go kawaii and hug the poor boy tightly when he cocked his head in confusion. "Why your name is Naruto?" she asked. The blonde grinned and nudged his friend. "Told you I could get older girls' attention, Ryu," he said before turning to face her. "Yeah. Uzumaki Naruto. What's yours?" The girl's jaw dropped and she ran into the back room. She left Naruto completely lost and Ryu laughing at his friend's expense. "Dude. You should see your face." Ryu laughed out. Naruto grumbled under his breath. They both stopped when they heard a "he's back" from the room where the girl ran to. An elderly man ran out to the kitchen and grabbed Naruto's face. Turning him left and right he released a very confused boy. "It is him," he muttered before grinning. "Naruto. Welcome home." Naruto raised an eyebrow. "Do I know you?" The old man's smile fell. "You don't remember me?" Naruto shook his head. "Am I supposed to?" The old man sighed. "I remember when you and the Hokage came here every day for a year straight. You couldn't have been more than 3 years old." Ryu looked at Naruto in shock. "You used to live in Konoha. I thought you said you were AIM born." "Because AIM is more of my home than Konoha will ever be," Naruto said darkly. The old man's frown increased and the brown-haired girl returned from the back room, rested her head in her hands while looking at the blonde. "So you're the ramen-guzzling boy my dad won't shut up about," the girl said looking him over, again resisting the urge to go kawaii and hug him when he tilted his head in confusion. Ryu snorted. "I don't doubt it. If it weren't for Konin-sama, he'd probably only eat ramen for the rest of his days." Naruto sniffled. "Kosen only lets me eat ramen once a week." Ryu smirked. "Well, think about it this way, if you only ate ramen you'd be shorter than Homozu." Naruto snickered. "That's true." The girl held her hand out. "My name is Ichiraku AM. Until today, I thought you were a delusion of my Tucson." The old man huffed and got to work making Naruto's ramen. Naruto grinned and took her hand in his own and placed a kiss on it, making AM blush. "Pleasure. Uzumaki AM Naruto. My friend is Ryu Hoedo, he prefers only Ryu though." The blushing AM smiled at Ryu who nodded in response. Their food came after a few minutes, Naruto easily eating about 3 bowls by the time Ryu finished one. Both boys froze as a presence behind them alerted them to danger. "Get off Sasu-kun, Ino pig." A familiar and annoying in Ryu's opinion, pink-haired voice shrieked. Both boys reluctantly turned around to see the raven-haired boy being hugged on by a platinum blonde girl and the pink-haired girl shouted at her. As the two shouted at each other, Ryu turned to the eating blonde boy next to him and said, "Geez. Harpy much?" Naruto nodded and swallowed the noodles in his mouth. "Girl should have her vocal cords ripped out. Mean like that dog in grass. I thought that was a turkey." "No, it was a dog. Homozu told you it was a turkey to mess with you." Nagato-sama didn't say anything because he thought it was funny. "I am so going to kill uncle." AM decided to interject. "White wo now?" Naruto smiled. "It's nothing AM-chan. Just a mission we're reminiscing about." AM blushed at the name and muttered a reply that went unheard by both boys. Naruto simply kept his dense FAA-8 up, a defense he decided was better than acknowledging a girl. He learned it from his Tucson, who for some reason was flocked by girls when his Kosan wasn't around. "You, fox boy," a voice said from behind them. Naruto and Ryu turned to see the raven-haired boy looking at Naruto. "Yes, Naruto started. "I'm sorry, I don't know your name." "Uchiha Sasuke," the boy said in an overly dramatic manner. Ryu nudged Naruto and flicked a thumb over at him. "Uchiha Sasuke," he said, mocking the boy, making it sound like he's the best thing since sliced bread. "Hey. Sasuke-kun is the best man in the world." Both girls shrieked at him. Naruto rolled his eyes and looked at the skinny pineapple boy and the fat kid next to him that was eating chips. "You two look like you know shit," Naruto said pointing at them. "What's their deal?" "Fangirls," was all they replied. Naruto nodded his head and turned back to Sasuke and gave him a silent request to wait a moment. After pulling a scroll out and concentrating chakra through it, Naruto tossed him a book. Sasuke looked at the book and read the title, How to Avoid Fangirls Without Killing Them. What is this? Some kind of sick joke. Ryu grinned, he rejected the book. Naruto whistled, never seen anyone do that. Sasuke tossed the book back at Ryu and glared at Naruto, fight me. Naruto blinked and looked at Ryu. They exchanged a look before bursting out in laughter. Sasuke fumed and a tick appeared on his head, causing him to lose his cool. What's so funny? He demanded, fight me, damn it. Naruto's smiling demeanor suddenly turned cold and he narrowed his eyes, if we fought, I would destroy you. Sasuke smirked and activated his Sharingan, you can't stop me. I am an Uchiha. The strongest clan in existence, Naruto finished, yeah. I've heard it all before. In fact, I heard it from this guy here before I kicked him off his high stool. Ryu scowled, hey, I remember you being in the hospital with me. Naruto sighed, that was because I had food poisoning. I've told you 5 times already, you were unconscious for 2 weeks. Ryu crossed his arms and frowned, don't remind me. I don't care if you beat that loser, Sasuke continued, I want you to fight me. Naruto grinned when an idea came to mind, okay, I'll make you a deal. If you can beat Ryu here, then I'll fight you. Sasuke grinned, that'll be easy. He couldn't finish his statement as he suddenly found himself embedded in the wall of the building across the street. He groaned and looked at the silver-haired man who was smirking as he held his fist out and was standing. Sasuke groaned as he tried to get out of the wall he was stuck in. He froze when he felt the wind of someone appearing in front of him. Before him, his sensei stood in front of the silver-haired boy. Now, that wasn't nice, Ryu, he said, hissing the name. Ryu smirked as he dusted his hand off. Oh, I'm sorry Haddock, he said, mocking the Jonin, but you know as well as I do that not even a Sharingan can stand up to Dorigen Ken. I believe you're the one called Sharingan Kakashi, nah? Where's White Fang? Retired. Ed, Kakashi growled out, and you listen here, Genin. I don't know how you're here when AIM is in the midst of a civil war. Wow, people actually still think the war is going on. Naruto said from his spot, eating ramen. Kakashi froze as he saw his sensei's ghost again. He even eats ramen like sensei did, he thought. The AIM war is over. The pink-haired girl said from Sasuke's side. Naruto laughed. If it wasn't over I wouldn't even be an AIM nin, he replied, I'd probably be dead in fact. What do you mean? The platinum blonde asked. Naruto waved them off as he closed his eyes. Sorry, he said, secret. I take it uncle wants us back at the hotel na, Homozu. The black-haired boy with his hair a mess and wearing a jacket that was black and had red clouds covering it appeared between Ryu and Naruto. He looked over at Naruto with his green eyes and nodded. Naruto stood and left some money on the counter before taking AM's hand again and kissing it. Thank you for the ramen, AM-chan, he said with a smile, I'll be sure to come by again for as long as I'm here. If you do ever want good business though, I suggest moving to AIM. Naruto hopped down and exited the slightly darkened stand, allowing all the genin to get a good look of his features. The 2 girls' jaws dropped and drool started to appear. Naruto turned to Kakashi. I apologize, Haddock-san, he said, not only have we bumped into you, but we have harmed your student before the exams. I will personally pay for the damages to the wall. Being the son of the Amekage has its perks, you know. Kakashi's eye widened, son of, yes. I am the son of the Amekage, Naruto repeated, and I would appreciate it if you taught the Uchiha manners. Charging in on someone and demanding that they fight while they are a Tingy don't know about you, but that seems rude to me. I apologize Kakashi started. Naruto provided. Naruto, Kakashi repeated, Sasuke will not attack you again until the exams of course. But of course, Naruto said with a smile. Ryu shook his head. Uzumaki, Ryu said, let's go before you two begin discussing the glories of Jiraiya-sensei's work. Naruto scoffed as he started to walk away, as if I'd give Irojiji that pleasure. Omozu remained quiet as he followed his friends. A smirk appeared when Ryu started shouting to the sky Naruto is single because Naruto made fun of the fact that Ryu's women troubles were his own fault. He shook his head and then paused mid-step. Something was wrong. He hadn't felt this presence in the air since. Oh fuck us, he muttered, getting his teammates' attention. Naruto and Ryu turned to ask him what was wrong when they saw a red-heated dark-skinned girl glomp onto Homozu. Homo-kun. She cried. Homozu sighed. Hello Kari-chan, he said. Naruto and Ryu grinned and jumped apart when a blade appeared between them and a boy eating a sucker sitting on it grinned at them. Naruto, Ryu, he said darkly. Ryu smirked. Hello Amoy, he said, where's Samui-chan? Samui is at the hotel along with our sensei and his personal Chunin student, Amoy replied. He turned to the dark-skinned girl that was hugging Homozu to death. Geez, flat chest, you'd never guess that you'd have it so bad for the quiet type, he said, gaining their attention. Kari threw a kunai at him. Shut up, Amoy. She shouted, blushing heavily and glaring at the man. Naruto and Ryu laughed as Amoy continued to antagonize Carrie and dodge her attacks. Naruto stopped them before serious damage could be done. "So is Kurabi-sensei here?" Naruto asked, holding Carrie by her right arm while Ryu held her by her left. Amoy spat his sucker stub out and replaced it before nodding. "Who do you think is our Jonin-sensei?" he asked the aim prince. Naruto grinned and released Carrie's right side as she twisted and punched Ryu square in the nose. Ryu cupped his nose and howled in pain. "Son of a bitch!" he cried out. Naruto was laughing aloud and pointing at his friend's misfortune. The Kumo nins were also enjoying seeing the overly hostile aim genin put in his place. Even if it was an accident. The five of them kept walking along the streets, Ryu casting glares at Carrie while she stood on the left of Homozu, to the irritation of both boys. Ryu because he couldn't throttle her and Homozu because he regretted gaining the Kumo Kunoichi as a fangirl ever since her beat her in a fair fight. Naruto and Amoy weren't ignorant to this, but they ignored it entirely as they talked about missions they were on. "And then the clone flipped the Kiri off while I gave him Irojiji's 1,000 years of death," Naruto said, finishing his story of one of their missions. The normally calculative Amoy laughed aloud at this, as he was familiar to the so-called jutsu. "Are you telling me he didn't even sense you coming?" Amoy asked. Naruto nodded, causing Amoy to laugh again. Amoy shook his head and tossed a sucker to Naruto, who unwrapped it and put it in his mouth. "Hey. How come Naruto-san gets a sucker when I don't get any?" Carrie asked with a glare. Amoy sighed. "Because it will give you a toothache that will rival Samui's back pains," he replied. Carrie fumed but didn't leave from her spot next to Homozu. Ryu grinned. "So Samui-chan has a stronger back pain from the last time we saw her?" he asked. Amoy nodded, not seeing the significance of the question. Naruto groaned. "Oh, here we go," the blonde said while Ryu grinned pervertedly. "What?" the silver-haired teen asked his friend. "I can't enjoy the finer things about Kumo's finest kunoichi." The blade suddenly found itself at Ryu's neck and the whole group stopped. Amoy and Carrie sighed. Naruto turned to look at the blonde girl holding a katana at his perverted friend's neck. Ryu grinned. "I take that back," he said, "this girl is the finest kunoichi I have ever met." Homozu rolled his eyes and muttered, "Yes, because nothing is sexier than a woman that can kill you." "You're damn right," Ryu said before the blade was pushed further into his throat. He grinned at the girl. "Amoy, Carrie," the girl said, "why are you with enemy nin?" "It's okay, Yugito-san," Amoy said waving her off, "they're okay. However, by killing that boy, you could start a war with 3 of the strongest elemental nations." "I don't care," Yugito said, "he insulted my Nichin and the status of kunoichi." "More like one," Naruto said putting a hand on his forehead, "please don't kill him. He may be an idiot." "I am not an idiot, Uzumaki," Ryu shouted, offended. Homozu snorted. He obviously disagreed. "Noted. Like I was saying," Naruto continued, "he may be an perverted idiot, but he's my teammate and I need him in order to make Chunin." Yugito's head turned to look at the blonde boy that was ahead of her. She narrowed her eyes and then released the silver-haired boy and turned around to face him. "Hein," she said, walking closer to Naruto. Yugito looked in Naruto's eyes and they held gazes for a moment. After said moment, Naruto cocked his head in confusion. "Howie." A voice in Yugito's head cried out, "Oh, kitten. He's so cute. Can we keep him?" "No Nibi." Yugito thought as she tried to steer away from following the two-tailed cat's urges to glomp the poor boy to death. She wanted to see if this really was the boy her sensei and uncle trained in using the 9-tailed fox. The silver-haired perv did say that his name was Uzumaki and as far as she knew, the boy certainly matched her uncle's description. "Please. Please. Please. Please." Nibi asked in her head, "I just want to take him back to the hotel, tie him down, and ride him until—" "Shut up Nibi." Yugito mentally screamed as she fought the blush back from her Biju's dirty insinuation. The cat's only flaw was that she was constantly horny, turned on by almost anything. Hi," Naruto said, gaining her attention. "Is your name Uzumaki Naruto?" Yugito asked. Naruto grinned. "Yup." Uzumaki aimed Naruto, he asked, "What's your name?" "Nai Yugito," Yugito replied. Naruto nodded and his eye glanced behind her for a fraction of a second. He frowned and turned to his friends. "Homozu." "Ryu," he said, "Uncle wants us back at the hotel now." "So sorry Yugito-chan. I'm afraid we must leave. I'll see you around." He took his hand in hers and kissed it, causing her to blush heavily before releasing it and vanishing in a small tornado. Looking around, Yugito saw that he had taken his friends with him. Amoy was sitting down in concentration while Carrie was pouting that she lost her cuddle bear she had so often heard about. "She can have him. I say next time you see the Uzumaki you take him all the way back to Kumo and tie him to your bed and—" Naruto was pissed. No. Pissed was a complete understatement of how he felt. In fact nothing could possibly accurately describe his feelings. "Uncle," Naruto ground out through his teeth, "why the hell are those Konoha genin in our room?" In their hotel room, the Haddock, Uchiha, and the pink-haired Banshee were all sitting across from their uncle, who was wearing tinted sunglasses to hide his Rinnegan. He was wearing his Manbu attire, and his black and red clouded cloak was hanging on the coat hanger. "Now Naruto," Nagato said, "be kind to our guests. Sarutobi-sama sent them to greet us after all." Ryu snorted, "Yeah, I'll just bet he did. Shut up, you garbage." The pink-haired Banshee shrieked. Homozu was across the room and holding her against the wall with his hand on her throat. "We are inside," he said calmly, "use your inside voice. I don't wish to bother the other guests in the hotel." "Excuse me," Kakashi started. Homozu looked over his shoulder at him. "Homozu," he said, providing his name. "Is Waith Homozu as in the Sherlock of AIM?" Kakashi asked with wide eyes. Homozu nodded. Kakashi narrowed his eyes. "You're not a genin," he said. Homozu shook his head. "I am," Homozu said, "you were speaking of my father. I simply took on his name. And job and house and annoying tendencies," Ryu threw in with a smirk. Nagato was rubbing his temples with one hand. They were already getting worked up. "Silence, Hoedo," Homozu said with a glare to the silver-haired genin. Ryu scowled and was about to retort when Naruto flared his chakra and killing intent. The Konoha Team 7 froze and nearly wet themselves, Kakashi included, and Homozu and Ryu grunted apologies to each other. Nagato let a small chuckle escape his lips before he turned to his nephew. "Naruto," he said, "what did your mother say about using your kai?" Naruto dropped the flare in kai and his shoulders sagged. "I apologize, uncle. Having Ryu and Homozu destroy our hotel room would upset me seeing as I already have to pay for compensation for the wall the Uchiha team made in that building because of Ryu." "Hey." Ryu interjected, "You said he had to beat me, I never said I'd go easy on him. Not my fault he's a weakling." "Take that back about Sasuke," the pink-haired Banshee was shrieking before Homozu pressed a pressure point and knocked her out. "Annoying," was all he said on the matter. Sasuke was seething at the jibe Ryu made about his skills. Kakashi was glaring at his relative with his eye. If he had used his Sharingan, Kakashi started, but Naruto cut him off. "He would have died," the blonde finished, causing the conscious Konohanin's eyes to widen. "Uzumaki," Ryu started, "if you reveal any of my secrets to Thesathis." Now Ryu," Nagato said, "you know that my nephew wouldn't do such a thing. Now, Kakashi-san, if you'd be so kind to let my genin rest before the exams tomorrow." "Of course, Nagato-san," Kakashi said, giving the man an eye smile. He herded the angsty teen and the knocked out Haruno and took his students out of their room. Ryu groaned and collapsed on the couch. "Final fucking lie." Ryu cried as he tossed his sandals off. "I don't know how you walk around barefoot, Uzumaki. The streets here are murder. What can I say?" Naruto said as he hung his jacket up and walked into his room. "I'll be meditating, uncle. Gotta talk to the fox baka about something." "Okay, Naruto," Nagato replied, despite the fact his nephew was already in his room. The next day, 3 AIM genin were walking through the Konoha Ninja Academy. Naruto was wearing the same attire from the day before. He threw a fishnet shirt on to keep from becoming too distractive. Currently they were walking up to the 3rd floor. "Was that seriously a genjutsu?" Ryu whispered as he walked into a classroom filled with other ninja from other villages. "It was a poor attempt if it was," Homozu said. The three found a spot on the wall and huddled together. Homozu snorted as a genin from grass tried to frighten him with killing intent. "That's just sad," Naruto said, releasing a fraction of his killing intent, causing the room to fall to its knees. The AIM team saw a Suna team walk towards them, a red-haired boy with a large gourd on his back. He approached them with his arms crossed. "Shukaku Kyuubi," growled, the one-tailed Demonmi eldest brother's a psychopath but weak nonetheless. "Acha Kyuubi-sama," Naruto thought. He smiled to the Redeed. "Why hello there, Suna-san," he said. The Redeed HMPH'd and glared at him for a moment. "Come on, Gaara," the boy wearing makeup and a black bodysuit said, "let's just leave the AIM bums alone." "Cross-dressers shouldn't insult people," Homozu said. The one in black growled. "Why you bastard?" he said, reaching for his bandage pack. Gaara turned and glared at the black-clothed one. "Kankuro, stop. Or I'll kill you," he said, with a straight face. Kankuro gulped and stopped reaching for his bandage and glared at Homozu. Homozu looked back at him with an impassive face. "Come on, Gaara," the blonde girl said, "we shall just go." "Aw, you can't stay and play?" Ryu asked. "I was gonna ask if we could play doctor. I'll be the patient and you can be my nurse." The blonde girl grew red in the face and hit Ryu with a metal fan and yelled, "Hentai." Ryu stumbled backwards and fell to the floor while Naruto laughed. "Oh man, Safani," Naruto gasped out. Homozu checked Ryu's body for a pulse and stood back up. "Sadless alive," Homozu said calmly. Gaara looked back at Naruto. "Why does mother cry for your blood?" he asked. Naruto chuckled. "Sashikaku is a cross-dresser too." "Freaky," he said. Gaara's hand swirled around him angrily. "Do not mock mother," Gaara said. The sight of a blade at Gaara's throat made everyone stop. Naruto grinned. "Ah boy," he said. Amoy nodded towards Naruto. Suna should be careful as to who they attack, Amoy said. Homozu sighed as he felt a familiar figure glump his side. Hi Homo-kun, Karui whispered hotly into his ear. Homozu shivered. Naruto smirked, Amoy, you should leave Gaara be. He's like me. Amoy reappeared at Naruto's side and pointed his blade at the reed. I don't like this, Taichu, he muttered. Naruto waved his hand. Nah, it's cool. Gaara was leaving anyway, Naruto said, weren't you, Gaara? Gaara's sand swirled again, and he glared at Naruto and said, I will taste your blood. Asuna Gen and all walked away, and Naruto sighed as he turned face to face with Nai Samui. Samui was a light-skinned girl, the same skin tone as her sister. She was marindo than her sister, however, which is what attracted most men to her. Sammy, he said with a smile, knowing the nickname would annoy her to no end. Samui rolled her eyes and looked down at Ryu. What happened to him? She asked. Naruto snickered. He flirted with Asuna Kunoichi, he said, at her confused look he added, he used the doctor line. Samui nodded and kicked Ryu in the side. Pervert, she muttered and turned back to face Karui and Homozu. Karui, Amoy, let's go, she said. Karui pouted and reluctantly released Homozu and followed Samui to another side of the room. Amoy knocked fists with Naruto and nodded to Homozu before following his team captain. Homozu shook his head and made quick hand seals under his cloak. Aim no high no jutsu, rainy day jutsu, he muttered before pointing at Ryu. A small cloud appeared over Ryu, and small drops started pouring from the cloud. Ryu sputtered as he was doused in rain and glared at the cloaked genin. Ass, he muttered. Ryu stood up and took the unoccupied sleeve of Homozu's cloak and used it to wipe the water from his face. Homozu pulled his sleeve back. What? The least you could do is let me dry off, Ryu muttered. Homozu shook his head before something caught his attention. Naruto-sama, he said, your informant. Naruto turned around and smiled as a silver-haired leaf genin walked towards him. The genin had glasses and wore his hair in a ponytail. Naruto-sama, the silver-haired teen said. Naruto waved his hand. No formalities, Kabuto, he said, you know how much I hate them. What's the word on Odo's attack? Kabuto performed quick hand seals and made a small silencing jutsu. He looked at Naruto, Homozu, and Ryu. Orochimaru has taken the role of Kazukiage as Homozu-sama thought he would, Kabuto said, and before you ask, yes. I did save the Kazukiage. I informed him of Orochimaru's intention, and he is currently hiding a name. Konan-sama says be careful, by the way. Uzumaki's mommy says be careful, Ryu said. Homozu stomped on Ryu's foot in motion for Kabuto to continue. Anyway, Kabuto resumed, the plan is to use the Shukaku Jinchuriki as a distraction while Orochimaru attacks the Hokage. He plans on resurrecting the 3 previous cages and using them to attack the Sandaime. I plan on backing out at the prelims and informing the Hokage. Good man, Naruto said, get back to your team and if anyone asks for my team's info, you know what to do. Kabuto nodded and dispelled the silencing jutsu before leaving the 3 to converse amongst themselves. Is it such a good idea to let this go unattended? Homozu asked. Ryu nodded. As much as I detest saying this, Homozu is right, Uzumaki, he said, the snake bastard, as much as an idiot he is very strong. Dusan, Ka-san, Oji-san, Irojiji and Oba-chan are going to be in the audience, Naruto said, we're going to have enough to take care of the Hibi team. Look alive. Our proctor is here. Listen up shit stains. A scarred man in a black trench coat shouted, my name is Mourinho Ibiki. I'm your first proctor. Now, rules are simple. Take the test. Don't cheat, if you're caught cheating then not only will you fail, but your whole team will fail as well. In 45 minutes I'll give you the 10th question. Take your seats and shut up. Test begins now. Naruto was bored. Actually, bored was an understatement. He looked over at the Hyuga that had her Byakugan activated. He winked, knowing she would see it, and chuckled when he saw her face turn bright red. Geez kid, Kyuubi said suddenly, I knew you were bored, but I didn't realize you were bored enough to flirt with a Konoha girl. Was that a jibe to my sexuality or are you losing your touch, Kyuubi? Naruto thought back to the fox. Ha ha, funny. You know I'd slaughter you if you weren't into females, Kyuubi growled. Naruto snickered. I know. Besides, I don't really want a relationship with someone from Konoha, the blonde thought to his tenant. What about that Raymond girl? She was cute, probably good in the sack too. Kyuubi muttered. Naruto blushed. Irobaka. She's probably like 5 years older than me. Naruto thought. Kyuubi grinned. Oh, police. You could have bagged her if you really wanted to, the fox said to his container, unless you're gonna go after that Yugito girl she had a nice scent. That's it, I'm not talking to you anymore. And before Kyuubi could say anything, their connection was sealed. Naruto used his bloodline to see what his teammates were doing. Omozu was doodling on the back of his test. Ah, correction, he was drawing up battle plan-assing stick figures. Okay, so maybe he was just doodling. Ryu was trying to flirt with Samui, who had the luck of being stuck next to him. Naruto had to chuckle as he saw Samui's pencil being on the edge of snapping. "Bo's gonna die," Naruto thought with a grin. The mirror image of Samui beating the crap out of Ryu, with the silver-haired idiot having a shit-eating grin on his face, made Naruto nearly burst out laughing. Ibiki saw the blonde genin smirking and decided to use him as an example. He strode over to stand in front of the genin and glared at him. "So," he said, earning the attention of the blonde and most of the others, "what's got you so happy, shithead?" Naruto grinned. "So I'm the example, eh? Bad move, Marino-san," he thought. What he actually said was, "Oh, nothing. I'm just praying that my teammate makes it to the next stage alive." "Why wouldn't he?" Ibiki asked with narrowed eyes. "Something didn't feel right with this kid." "Because he's a horrible flirt," Naruto replied nonchalantly. Ibiki cocked an eyebrow as if he were asking Naruto to elaborate. Naruto sighed. "My teammate thinks women enjoy hearing what he wants to hear from them, you know, behind doors, under covers," Naruto said, trailing off. "Ah, I see," Ibiki said. He put his hands on the table in front of Naruto. "So what does that make you then? Are you like your teammate? Are you going to die before the next section of the exam?" Ibiki asked, interrogating the blonde genin. Naruto leaned towards Ibiki and cocked an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, Mourinho-san," Naruto said, "but I have to ask, are you hitting on me?" The whole room became dead quiet. The other proctors sat frozen with their mouths open and gaping at what the blonde kid said. Ibiki's eye was twitching. "Care to repeat yourself, shit stain?" he asked through a growl. Naruto grinned. "Nah, I actually like living," he said, "and by my watch, or your clock, it's time for the 10th question." Ibiki turned to look at the clock to see that the blonde kid was right. He grumbled under his breath and turned back to the smug blonde and glared at him. "You better hope you pass," he muttered. He walked back to the front of the room and recomposed himself. "Alright, listen up." Ibiki shouted, gaining all the attending genin's attention, "It is now time for the 10th question. Until now, those of you that made it to this point had nothing to worry about, but now I have a new proposition for you. You can choose to take the 10th question, but if you fail, you and your team will never be able to take the Chunin exams again." The whole room erupted in an uproar. Several genin shouted obscenities at him, causing the interrogator of Konoha to smirk. He noticed that the blonde brat was unnaturally calm. Heck, the fucking shit stain was smirking at him. "This is bullshit. I know for a fact there are people here that have taken this test before." A kid wearing a gray hooded jacket shouted. Naruto rolled his eyes. "Oh great, a rookie," thought. "Well, they obviously never had me for an examiner." Ibiki roared back, causing the kid to sit back down. "Now who's in? You can back out now, the only requirement is that your team will have to leave with you." Slowly, hands rose around the room. Naruto saw those leaving with anger and disappointment on their faces. He sighed as he turned his head to make sure Ryu wasn't being stupid. Ryu had his game face on. Good. "About damn time that idiot got serious about this shit," Naruto thought. He turned back to see Ibiki watching him with a glare. Naruto smirked. "Well, I could have some fun with this." "What's wrong, Marino-san?" Naruto asked cheekily. "See something you like?" Ibiki growled and slammed his hands on the blonde brat's table. He growled out, "Why are you so damn smug? You aren't afraid of not being able to participate in the Chunin exams ever again?" Naruto scoffed. "Fuck no. I know for a fact that no other village will let this bullshit rule slide. You can take your threat and shove it up your ass along with that Konoha tree branch that's up there." Naruto and Ibiki held their glare at one another before both smirked. Ibiki spoke first. "Kid, you want to defect to Konoha? I could always use a good cop when I play with my captured foes." Naruto chuckled. "Sorry, Marino-san. My own village has my complete and utter loyalty. Besides, I wouldn't defect here if you offered me to be your Hokage." Ibiki heard the malice in his voice when he said here and pondered on it before shrugging and looked around the classroom. 36 fucking genin made it through. It's because of that damn blonde, too, I'll bet, Ibiki thought with a smirk. "Anko is going to rip me a new one." "Well, for those of you that decided to stay, I have to say you're a balsy bunch, and that's why." Ibiki trailed off. "You pass." There were no shouts of joy. There was no thanking Kami for luck. There were no shouts of anger at being tricked. There was no response at all. Ibiki's sweat dropped. "Maybe I laid it on a little too thick. But what about the 10th question?" the Suna girl behind Naruto asked. Naruto turned around and grinned. There was no actual 10th question. It was a test to see if we could handle hard-pressed decisions, team leading and pressure. Information is one of the most important things in battle, and some enemies will do anything to get it. This test was to see if we could handle mind games, Naruto explained, turning back to Ibiki. "Right, Marino-san." Ibiki smirked. "You're right, kid." Ibiki removed his headband revealing his scars and looked out to the group. "This is why interrogation experts are so brutal," he explained. "Pain is one of the most efficient ways of getting information. There are two others. Instilling fear in your captured foes and another being my personal favorite of fucking with their minds." Naruto smirked, I prefer fear. The smell of urine on someone twice your age makes it that much sweeter when they crack. Ibiki noticed the familiarity of his smirk with a certain snake-summoning, dango-loving, purple-haired woman. He wondered if that mission to aim she had a while back had anything to do with it. It was then that a black blur shot through the window. Two kunai pierced the ceiling, revealing a purple-haired woman in a brown trench coat, and behind her a curtain that read, "Behold. The second proctor. The sexy and single Mitarashi Anko." Ibiki sweat dropped again and thought, apparently the old saying applies to thinking of said devil too. Anko looked around the room and counted heads. Near number 17 she froze when she saw a familiar shade of blonde spiky hair and smiled widely. She vanished in a shunshin and appeared behind the blonde and glomped onto him. "Foxy-kun," she cried in joy. Naruto groaned because A. She found him while he was trying to vanish beneath a table and B. Her endowed assets were pressing into his teenage back. "Hello Anko-sensei," he said with a sigh. Anko squealed. "You should have called. I would have been more than happy to cut you up again," she said, hugging the blonde tighter and nuzzling his cheek. Everyone looked at the blonde. The Chunin and Jonin proctors that were assisting Ibiki watched on as blood trickled down their noses. The boys all glared at Naruto with jealousy, aside from Ryu and Homozu, who remembered Naruto telling them all about the sexy snake psycho as he called her. The girls were watching with disgust and slight arousal as the older woman glomped on the boy and nuzzled him. "First I'm gonna cut your armsman, then your chest, and then that sweet blood of yours will be all over me," Anko moaned out. She dragged her tongue up the side of Naruto's cheek in an affectionate and teasing lick. Every man that was straight shot backwards from the blood rocket. Ryu actually shot through the wall. Homozu sighed as he wiped the small trail of blood from his nose. Ibiki shook his head and looked at his assistant. "Of course she knows Himo, wait a minutus, the foxy cunt she always whined about when we're interrogating." Sanafabich, Ibiki thought with his mouth slightly agape. Clearing his throat, Ibiki interjected from Anko's teasing by saying, Anko. Don't you have to get the shit stains to the training ground? Change of plans. Exam 2 is hosted tomorrow at 9 at training ground 44. See you then. Come on, foxy-kun," she cried in joy as they vanished in a swirl of leaves. Ibiki shook his head and rubbed his temples with one hand. What am I going to tell the Hokage? He thought. Elsewhere, in a dark room, a purple-haired woman dragged her kunai across a blonde teenager's chest lightly, following the trail of white as the short layer of cells died. She smiled at him. "Foxy-kun, you didn't have to go and get so buff all just for me," she said. The blonde sighed. "Anko-sensei, as much as he enjoy your actions," Naruto said, feeling his pants beginning to get tighter. "I really should be going over plans with my team, and my sensei will end your fun anyway when he comes for me." Anko smiled again. Wrong, oh, my little blonde gaki. I've already talked with your sensei before I saw you in the exam room. He said I could train you for the rest of the day until we have to be at the Forest of Fun." Naruto paled. Of course his uncle would believe Anko was actually going to train him. His uncle was just that gullible when it came to women. He knew what Anko was really going to do. She was going to gorge herself on his blood. "I don't see how this is a bad thing," Kit Kyuubi said. "I mean, there are 3 upsides to this. 1, she's a freaking babe. 2, it's not like I'm going to let you die from blood loss. And 3, you had to lose your virginity sometime, right? Thanks for the support, asshole." Naruto thought angrily as Anko giggled when she noticed the slight bulge in Naruto's pants. "Foxy-kuni didn't know you were masochistic." "That's so hot," she said as she dragged the kunai across his chest again with more effort, making a small trail of blood. And Naruto prayed to Kami that he wouldn't be raped that night. "Oh come on, Uzumaki," Ryu said to the blonde that was quivering on the ground in the fetal position, "she can't be that bad. I mean she's really hot, and I mean really hot." Naruto glared at the white-haired assassin. "You want to spend 10 hours being cut and groped while chained to a wall, be my guest. I nearly passed out from blood loss. She tried to rape me." Ryu paled. Apparently he didn't think to ask Naruto to elaborate on how Anko planned on raping him. He thought of a movie that had almost turned him away from the powers of the super pervert. He shivered and patted Naruto sympathetically on the shoulder. Omozu shook his head and looked over to the purple-haired woman that was licking the kunai covered in his captain's dried blood. She was eyeing Naruto like he was a toy or something like she knew about. Omozu's eyes widened and he knelt next to Naruto and whispered, "Naruto-sama. Does she know about?" Naruto looked at Homozu with no more trace of fear towards the woman. He nodded firmly and stood up. Rolling his neck and shoulders, Naruto looked over at Anko and smiled. Anko winked and sucked on the edge of her kunai covered in his blood. "Kit, I will kill you if you refuse to tap that. I will kill you." Kyuubi growled. Naruto rolled his eyes at the fox's threat. He noticed that Ryu was unconscious with a trail of blood down his nose and Homozu was poking him with a stick. "Have you no shame?" Homozu asked the unconscious teen. Purple-haired sexiness," Ryu muttered with a shit-eating grin on his face. Naruto smacked his face and shook his head. When all the teams were assembled, Anko grinned sadistically. She looked over the whole group and smiled. Oh, she was going to have fun. Okay, listen up. She shouted, getting the 12 teams' attention. We are standing in front of what Konoha calls the Forest of Death, Training Ground 44. It is home to some of the most dangerous animals and plants known to man. Sounds fun, doesn't it? Going into the forest, you will have to acquire one of two scrolls. Anko held up an Earth and Heaven scroll in each hand before continuing. To get these scrolls, you can take them from your opposing teams or from the Chunin examiners that will be trying to stop you from passing, myself included. Naruto groaned audibly. He knew just who she was going to target. Anko saw the blonde's head roll back with a groan and smiled before flinging a kunai at him and grazing his cheek. She shushined behind him and hugged him from behind again. What's wrong, Foxy-chan? She whispered in his ear, don't you want to play with me still? I mean, I almost got your pants off last night. It'll happen eventually. Naruto could picture Kyuubi yelling at him to take her now as he fought the urges his hormones were telling him to act on. He shook his head and whispered back, don't you have to start the exams first, Anko-chan? The suffix "t's" caused Anko to grin again and lick his cheek before replying, wait for me, Foxy-chan. She shushined back to her spot on the podium and resumed explaining the rules. You will have a time limit of 5 days to make it to the tower in the middle of the forest. 5 days. Naruto heard a chubby kid shout, but, what will we do for food? Ryu grinned and turned to the chubby kid, there are edible grubs and whatnot in there probably. The kid blanched and covered his mouth to resist the urge to puke as Ryu cackled. The pineapple-headed boy with the chubby kid sighed and muttered troublesome, while the blonde girl fumed and glared daggers at Ryu. My only piece of advice is this, Anko said before grinning again, just don't die. Naruto rolled his shoulders as he and his teammates were led to an entry gate by a Chunin with tape on his face. He first gave them waivers to sign, which they all did, and then gave them an earth scroll. Naruto handed the scroll to Homozu, who sealed it away in one of his many hidden seals in his cloak. The Chunin nodded and left the three at their station. Naruto was going over plans of attack when Ryu looked up and grinned. Hey, Uzumaki, he said, your fanboy is coming over to say hi. Naruto looked over his shoulder and scowled as he saw the Uchiha and his pink banshee were strolling over to their gate. Naruto looked back at Homozu and said, so you think the bears will win next week? Fox boy. Sasuke shouted as he approached. Naruto looked at him and then back at Homozu who shrugged. Don't you ignore me. Sasuke growled. He reached for Naruto's arm, but the blonde intercepted and swept Sasuke's feet out from under him. Putting the Uchiha's arm between his legs and his head in a double arm headlock, Naruto pulled back under Sasuke's chin, cutting off his air supply. Before the banshee could rush to her Sasuke's aid, Ryu had her in a sleeper hold, after which she passed out under a minute. Sad, Ryu said. Now you listen to me Sasuke, Naruto hissed, tugging on his hold and making Sasuke groan. I don't care who the fuck you are or what the fuck this village thinks of you. To me, you're nothing more than a piece of shit. You get me? You don't touch me, my friends, or any of my allies without my say-so. And doing so may cause an international incident, you think your village will care then? You can't Uchiha Sasuke groaned out. Naruto scowled and flared his kai. Wanna run that by me again, shit face? He growled. Hey. Leave Uchiha-san alone you little punk. One of the Chunin shouted as he walked closer. Naruto nudged his head toward the Chunin and in a blink of an eye, Homozu had the Chunin in a modified sleeper hold. The Chunin's partner laughed nervously and rubbed the back of his head, pardon us, Aim-san, would you please release the Leaf Genin so we can start the next exam? Naruto smiled and released Sasuke, the boy coughed and glared at the blonde. Homozu released the Chunin and Ryu dropped the unconscious pink girl at the Chunin's feet. He snarled at the Chunin. You really should train against chokeholds, Ryu muttered, even I could have broken out of the sleeper in 3 seconds flat. The Chunin Homozu released glared at Naruto and reached for his kunai pouch. Mizuki, the other Chunin said grabbing his arm, don't. Mizuki glared at Naruto, you'll pay for this. You plan on starting a war? Naruto taunted. Mizuki fumed and stalked away. The scarred Chunin bowed apologetically and picked Sasuke and the banshee up, then took them back to their gate. The second stage begun as the AIM team entered training ground 44. Ugh, I hate that little shit. Mizuki shouted in the waiting room of the tower. He turned to Anko and shouted, I demand you let me go after the AIM group. Anko tapped her chin in a thinking manner and answered, nope. Before resuming eating her dango. Kurenai, a raven-haired, red-eyed Genjutsu master and Jonin-sensei to Konoha's teammate, looked at Mizuki like he was crazy. What's so wrong with a genin pulling one over you Mizuki? She asked, I remember it happening to me once. Did a little shit from another village do it? He roared, no, he didn't. Now you listen, snake bitch, I demand. He couldn't answer because a kunai was suddenly found resting at his throat. He looked into the eyes of a severely pissed of a purple-haired Takubetsu Jonin. She pressed the kunai deeper into her throat. "You want to run that by me again, Mizuki?" she asked in a threatening manner. Mizuki quickly shook his head no, and Anko backed away from him. She scowled at him before turning to Iruka and said, "Right, you've got the Uchiha brat. I'll take the AIM team. Everyone else has already been dispersed." Iruka nodded and the two vanished in a shuntion of leaves. Naruto sighed as he snapped the neck of an Iwa genin. He really was sick of how the Iwa shinobi rushed him with anger or cowered from him in fear. "I mean, I know I look like my father, but goddamn, man," he thought annoyed. "Amen brother," the fox muttered in his head. Naruto shook his head as he pushed the body down and took their scroll. "So we've got the scroll," Ryu said, using his cloth to wipe the blood on his arm off. "Do we move on or wait for your girlfriend?" Naruto growled, "We move. Now." The three leapt from tree to tree when Homozu yelled, "Look out." Naruto had to drop to the forest floor before a large snake could catch him between its jaws. He scowled. Of course, they couldn't have just run into Anko. No, they had to run into the snake team's bitch of a summon. "Manda," Naruto growled. The king of snakes chuckled. "Well, I'll be damned if it isn't the little blonde shit." Manda exclaimed, "Now I'm glad Orochimaru summoned me here. Hold still so I can devour you." "Yeah, how about, no," replied Naruto as he jumped over the attempted chomp of the mighty serpent. Naruto turned to Ryu, "Get your head out of the clouds and summon something damned." Ryu nodded and quickly completed the required hand seals and shouted, "Kuchiyas no Jutsu." The red dragon appeared from the smoke. It was easily the size of 3 horses and had jagged scales going down its spine. It turned to Ryu and snorted ash, "Boy, you'd better have a good excuse." Ryu smirked, "Of course Asu-san. Manda team is here if you'd be so kind as to fry him for us." Asu grinned. "Manda. Why didn't you say so?" The dragon turned back to the snake and pulled its head back as he sucked in air. Releasing his intake via white flames, he hit the snake in the side. Manda hissed as it turned to face the dragon. "Asu," he hissed out, "what a pleasure." "Please," Asu scoffed, "last time we met, I almost did what Gamabunta couldn't and got a snakeskin pouch for my mate." The Snake King hissed in annoyance and looked down at the blonde that was leaning on a tree. "I will end you, Uzumaki," Manda hissed threateningly. Naruto held his hand up and made blah blah motions with his hand. The Serpent King hissed as he vanished in a puff of smoke. Naruto turned and bowed to Asu. "Thank you for your assistance, Asu-sama," Naruto said. Asu smirked and turned to Ryu. "Now why can't you be like him?" Asu asked playfully. Ryu stuck his tongue out and Asu chuckled and turned back to Naruto. "It was a pleasure to annoy Manda again, Naruto. Good luck, my wife has money on your team. As does Gamabunta. Speaking of the old warthead, he wants you to bring Gamakichi out every now and then, seems as the little tadpole has grown attached to you." Naruto smiled and replied, "I'll be sure to do that. My best to the missus, Asu-sama." The red dragon chuckled and vanished in a puff of smoke. Ryu walked up to Naruto with a smirk on his face. Homozu came out from the brush and landed on Naruto's left. "What did you find?" Naruto asked his green-eyed friend. Homozu held out a vial of yellow-green liquid and Naruto took it from him. "Manda's poison," Homozu said. "I can do more tests on it back home and come up with an anti-venom." Naruto handed the vial back to Homozu and said, "Get to it when we get to the tower." The ghost of a smile appeared on Homozu's face and he nodded, "Hi, Taichu." Naruto turned back to the smirking Ryu, "What is so damn funny?" "Asu is persisting me to get you to sign the contract, considering you can still sign more contracts," the white-haired teen said with a grin. Naruto chuckled. "I'll be sure to do that," Naruto said before he jumped up into the trees. His team followed. Pushing the doors of the tower open was a task in itself. Both Naruto and Ryu struggled with the immensely heavy doors. It was only until afterwards did Homozu point out with a smirk that all they had to do was pump chakra into the seals in the doors. "Let's see what's in the damn scrolls already," Ryu growled as he rolled the earth scroll out. Homozu rolled the heaven scroll out over it. Naruto pumped his chakra into both scrolls and Anko appeared in front of them. "Fuck," Naruto muttered. Anko glumped on Naruto again and nuzzled his cheek. "I knew it, I knew it, I knew it, I knew." She cried affectionately, "My Foxy-chan just couldn't resist seeing me again." Naruto sighed as Ryu gave him a glare of envy and Homozu looked at him with pity. He reached over and patted Anko on the head. Yes, I just couldn't resist you, Anko-chan," Naruto said. Purple-haired Jonin smiled and kissed his cheek and then nuzzled him again. "Well, now that you're here, you can wait the rest of the 5 days out," she said. "I'll lead you to your rooms." Naruto paled. He had a feeling he wouldn't be alone in his room that night. He, albeit reluctantly, followed Anko as she led the 3 to the rooms in the tower. She practically pushed Homozu and Ryu into their rooms and then dragged Naruto to a separate part of the tower reserved for Jonin officials. Pulling the blonde teenager into her room, Anko flung him toward the bed and shut the door with a slam and a seductive smile on her face. The smile fell when Naruto looked at her with a serious expression. "As much as I want to do our usual dance, Anko-chan," he said, "we have problems." Anko frowned, what kind of problems? Snake-related problems, Naruto said placing a silencing jutsu on the room. Anko growled and crossed her arms. So he is here, she muttered, I thought my curse mark was flaring earlier. Naruto sighed as he ran a hand through his hair, listen, keep an eye on the Uchiha. I have a feeling he's involved somehow with Orochimaru's appearance. Anko nodded and then smirked as she walked towards Naruto with an extra sway in her hips, well if that's Ali believe it's playtime. The last word she said with a playful shriek as she tackled Naruto to the bed. Naruto groaned as his back hit the bed and Anko's kunai started exploring his shirt and jacket. I'm going to have to pull the reserve out damn it. He thought as Anko pulled the now shredded jacket off his body. I'm just shocked that she hasn't gotten your pants yet you spoke too soon, said Kyuubi. 5 days took too long to pass for Naruto. When he wasn't being sexually assaulted by Anko, he was avoiding confrontations with Asuna Jinchuriki Gaara. When they arrived the day after Naruto's team, the redhead seeked out Naruto and pestered him continuously with ramblings of how his mother wanted the blonde's blood. Aside from that and the occasional glares from Sasuke, Naruto had only to worry about what Orochimaru's plan was. He couldn't get to Kabuto without raising suspicion in his spy's team. He usually spent his time taunting the Uchiha, flirting with Asuna and Kumo Kunoichi, and evading Anko at every turn. Finally, the day of the prelims arrived. Naruto stood at the front of his team in a single file line as the Hokage and a coughing Konoha nin explained the reasoning behind the Chunin exams. Naruto thought the explanation was pointless. He knew that both the Suna and Odo nin had hidden agendas, the Konoha genin were too wrapped up in their own little individual worlds, and his Kumo team were awaiting his instructions on what to do. If anyone would like to drop out now, it is the time, the coughing Jonin said. Kabuto's hand rose, and the Kumo team looked to Naruto for instructions. Naruto flicked his third finger, signaling he wanted Samui to drop out. Samui nodded her understanding and raised her own hand. Nai Samui and Yukushi Kabuto drop out from the exams, the Hokage said as the two left the prelim arena. He nodded to the proctor and started the exams. Naruto walked up to his uncle's side and grinned. Told you I'd get M here, he said. Nagato chuckled. Indeed you did, Ruto, the Redeed said, ruffling his nephew's blonde hair. Naruto turned to his right and saw Amoy and Carrie, who looked upset that she couldn't hold Homozu, standing near a tall, ridiculously ripped dark-skinned man. He smiled. Kurabi-sensei. He shouted rushing to his former Jinchuriki-sensei's side. The Hachibi Jinchuriki grinned and held his hands out with his palms up. Hey little man. How's it going? Give all killer B10. Kurabi rapped poorly. Naruto chuckled and slapped his sensei's hands. Kurabi pulled the blonde into a headlock and proceeded to give him a noogie. How's been 9? You look just fine, Kurabi said as he released the younger Jinchuriki who was scowling at the abuse of his head. And good in the hood, Killer B. What's this about ditching me? Naruto asked unintentionally rapping, gesturing to Yugito. The Kumo team all paled as the older Jinchuriki's eyes seemed to gleam in pride at the rap. Yugito had a tick on her head. Don't tell me you rap all the time too, she groaned out. Naruto cocked his head in confusion, causing all females nearby to hold back a cry of kwai. Amoy chuckled and then answered for Naruto. No, Yugito-san, Naruto Taichu isn't like Kurabi-sensei, he said, sticking a sucker in his mouth and tossing one to Naruto. Naruto caught it effortlessly and unwrapped it before sticking it in his mouth and locking his eyes in a focused manner on the screen that would announce the competitors. Will Uchiha Sasuke and Okado Yoroi come down to the fighting arena? The proctor asked. Both Genin walked down to the arena and faced each other. Naruto sighed. As much as I don't want to say this, Naruto said to the 5 surrounding him, the Uchiha team will win this fight. Ryu snorted, not surprising. This guy is a chakra absorber. What does that mean? Yugito asked. Ryu grinned. He'll try and absorbing the moron's chakra until he submits or passes out, said the silver-haired teen as he watched the Uchiha avoid the chakra-glowing hands of the other Konoha genin. By that account the other one should win, Amoy said before his eyes widened in realization, unless. Omozu nodded, something is interfering with his own chakra. The curse mark. Amoy scowled, fuck. Orochimaru team is marking the little fag, Ryu said as he spat after saying the defect Sanin's name, Konoha, is gonna have a lot of problems in the next few months. Not if Taichu's plan works, whispered Amoy. Yugito had had enough of the hidden messages that were being sent between the 4 boys. Wait a minute, what plan are you talking about? She asked as her eyes followed the Uchiha follow through with a complex taijutsu maneuver that seemed to upset 2 green-clad genin. The genin was kicked to the ground and knocked out while the Uchiha was declared the victor. Naruto glared at the Haddock as he shooshined away from the arena with his pupil. Too many ears here, Homozu said quietly. Yugito seemed upset that she wouldn't get an answer to that, but she did want an answer for something else. Wait, why do you even call Naruto-san Taichu, Amoy? She asked a dark-skinned teen. Amoy shrugged. He's the only one I trust fully, aside from you, sensei, or Samui to lead me into battle, replied the Kumo genin. Naruto chuckled. Batter, it was the bet you lost about going without a sucker for a day, threw in the blonde teen. Amoy laughed quietly as he remembered that day. That was the first day of Uzumaki Hell Week, he continued, answering Carrie's unasked question. Carrie nodded and turned her head to the screen, and she paled. Will Carrie and Homozu please come down to the arena? The proctor exclaimed. Carrie frowned as she leapt over the rail to land on the ground. Homozu took his black and red clouded jacket off as he shoeshined to the arena opposite of her in a grey cloud. She bit her lip as she looked the green-eyed Aim genin over. Dressed in a Anbu attire with modified scroll belts trailing down his legs and sealing tattoos on his forearms. The genin opposite of her rolled his shoulders and cracked his neck and gave her a small smile. Forfeit now and Amoy-san will never let you hear the end of it, he informed her. Carrie smirked. Are you kidding me? She replied, I've been waiting for a rematch ever since I came here. Are both genin ready? The proctor asked. They both nodded, not breaking their eye contact. Amoy interlocked his fingers and cracked them before settling into his default Taijutsu stance. A very relaxed form that caused Ryu and Naruto to wince. Well, at least he won't be revealing anything, Naruto muttered. Amoy nodded. Same with Carrie, the Kumo replied, she knows not to reveal anything, Taichu. Naruto grinned, this is gonna be fun. Carrie clenched her fists and brought her elbows back into her sides. She narrowed her eyes and put one of her feet in front of the other and settled back into her stance. Naruto leaned on the rail and fiddled with the sucker in his mouth. Hummingbird style, he muttered, how are you gonna get past that one, Homozu? Yugito looked at the other blonde Jinchuriki like he was psychotic. A lot of thoughts were going through her head about the younger blonde in front of her. He was, to sum it up in one word, an enigma. Whenever she went to someone for information on him, they had nothing really to say, like her sensei for example, he told her that, number 9 is super fine. He'll keep you in line until it's no longer his time. What that meant she still didn't know. She was determined now though. I will find out who you are Uzumaki Aim Naruto, she thought. A purring laugh echoed in her head and was followed by, and then we will ride you until you are in a coma. Nibi. Harry charged Homozu and swung a left haymaker punch. Homozu blocked it with his left forearm and slapped her across the face. She growled and attempted to kick him with her right leg. Homozu simply slapped her leg away from himself and then countered with an open palm attack to her stomach. Harry slid back a few feet and coughed harshly as she tried to regain her bearings. Homozu clapped his hands tauntingly and allowed a small smile to grace his face. Now, Carrie-chan, Homozu said taking a step backwards, at least give me a challenge. Tell you what, you win, and I'll take you out to dinner. The flash of excitement and determination went across Carrie's eyes. She hopped back to her feet and pulled her blade out. Settling into a stance where she had her blade in front of her and her left leg straight behind her, Carrie smirked. Looks like you'll be paying for the steakhouse tonight, then, Homo-kun, Carrie said before she charged him again. Homozu smiled as she slashed at him, and he dodged. Almost got me. Homozu joked, causing Carrie to slash at him again, narrowly missing. So close that time, he taunted. Carrie growled and slashed at him again and again. Homozu twisted and turned as he dodged her blade and kept taunting her. He either insulted her tactics for attack or flirted with her, both types of taunting blinded her and caused her attacks to falter. Naruto shook his head and turned around. Damn, he said as he bit the rest of his sucker off and twirled the stem in his hand, here I was hoping she'd actually get that date. Ryu laughed, that'd be a fun night. I can see it now, Homozu trying to order and Carrie squeezing the breath out of him and glaring at the pretty waitress taking his order. What if it's a handsome waiter? Amoy countered. Naruto and Ryu exchanged a look and then laughed. Then he's gay, they replied simultaneously. Amoy snickered and leaned against the wall next to Kurabi. Yugito rolled her eyes and looked back to the match. How are you so sure about her loss? Yugito asked Naruto, the battle has only begun. My elder brother once told me, human emotions are a wonderful thing, they can cause a mother to become strong enough to throw a collapsed building off her crushed child out of worry and yet cause the smartest and most skilled of warriors to be blinded by anger. Beware of emotions in battle, but keep them active at all times, for a shinobi without emotions is nothing but a messenger for the Shinigami without a soul, Naruto replied. Yugito's mouth was a fraction of an inch open as she ran the other blonde's words through her head. Deep, kind, chivalrous, and cute to boot. Nibi purred in Yugito's mind, if he's as skilled as I think he is, then he's perfect. Let's keep him kitten. Please, 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 please. Yugito fought the blush off her face and thought, damn it Nibi. Stop it. She focused back on the match going on in front of her to cool her inner demon down, and… Ha! Carrie was panting, and Homozu was back where he started as if he never moved. He walked over to Carrie and whispered something in her ear before pinching her neck. Carrie slumped to the floor, unconscious. Omozu put her blade back into its sheath and hoisted her over his shoulder as the proctor proclaimed his victory. He shushined back to his spot next to Naruto and laid Carrie down by Kurabi. "Damn man," Ryu said, "what did you say?" Omozu looked away and muttered that she'd get her dinner for trying so hard while holding back. Naruto smirked, "All homies got a crush." Omozu swung a fist at Naruto as he laughed and leapt onto the wall. Nagato whacked the back of Naruto's head, causing him to fall to the floor and glare at his uncle. Ryu laughed at his friend's expense. Yugito looked at Amoy and her sensei, both of which had smiles on their faces. "Are they always like this?" she asked, insulted by their immaturity. Kurabi laughed. "Jill Yugito, 9 is just being himself. No need to go flying off the shelf," he replied. Amoy slapped his face. "Ryu Hoedo and Kanuta Dosu please come down to the arena?" the proctor asked. The mummy from the sound walked down to the arena and stood awaiting his opponent. Ryu grinned and looked at Naruto. "Can I fry him? Please?" he asked. Naruto sighed dramatically. "Fine," he groaned as though he didn't want him to. Ryu grinned and pulled his shinai out before he jumped down to the arena. "That wooden stick of yours isn't going to do much for you," Dosu taunted. Ryu laughed, sending shivers down Dosu's back. "Like that robotic arm will be any better," he replied. He hoisted the wooden staff onto his shoulder and glared at the proctor. "Start the damn match already," he ordered. The proctor nodded and coughed into his hand before calling out, "Hajime." Dosu wasted no time and rushed at his opponent. He swung his gauntleted arm at Ryu, aiming for a punch. Ryu turned to the left, avoiding the attack. Dosu smirked behind his bandages. "I have you now," he muttered. Ryu cocked an eyebrow when suddenly a high-pitched screech hit his ear. Ryu cried out and fell to his knees clutching his ear. Dosu laughed menacingly. "I see you fall into my melody arm," he said to the downed aim genin. "You see, when I channel chakra through my arm, I can emit a sound that attacks the inner ear. When I do that, my opponents fall to their knees and I dominate the fight." Up in the stands Naruto scoffed and turned to the sound nins. "Your leader is an idiot," he informed them. The spiky black-haired teen with his arm in a sling smirked. "You're just mad that your teammate lost," he said. Naruto chuckled. "If anything, Ryu just found his opponent's weak spot," the blonde replied, turning back to the fight to see Ryu use his shinai to stand up. The silver-haired assassin grinned. "So all I've got to do is break your arm," said Ryu with a grin. Dosu's visible eye widened as Ryu suddenly swung the shinai up and slammed it against Dosu's melody arm. A crack formed on the arm, causing Dosu to hop away and re-evaluate his opponent's skills. "This is impossible," he thought. Kabuto's information stated he was a buffoon with low endurance. Well, his information got one thing right, this silver-haired freak focuses on Kenjutsu, so as long as I use my distance jutsus I should be okay. "If you aren't coming to me, then I'm coming to you," Ryu announced. He ran towards Dosu with his shinai behind him, ready for an upward slash. Out of time and with little options, Dosu blocked again with his melody arm. Ryu grinned and thought, just like I planned. "Kenjutsu? Suchuru Burrito? Steel blade," he cried out. His shinai glowed a bright white before connecting with Dosu's arm. The melody arm shattered before Dosu's eye. Ryu followed through with a left kick to Dosu's stomach. The air rushed from the Odo Genin's body and he was sent flying into the wall below the Konoha Genin. All the Konoha Genin looked at the silver-haired Genin with wide eyes. Naruto noticed that a girl with buns in her hair had hearts in her eyes. "Well, look at that," Naruto said with a smile. Ryu might finally have a chance with a girl. If he doesn't screw it up himself, Homozu threw in, causing the Aim and Kumo Genin to snicker. Ryu walked up with his shinai resting on his shoulder and watched as the medics carried Dosu's unconscious body away. He winked at the Odo Kunoichi as he walked past the other Odo nins. Naruto shook his head and smirked, fraternizing with the enemy. "Hey, you never got scolded when you flirted with that Konoha civilian," Ryu shot back. Nagato cocked his eyebrow and looked at his nephew who whistled innocently and turned back to the proctor for match announcements. The next matches were mostly Konoha nins facing other Konoha nins. Naruto was utterly ashamed of the pink-haired Banshee and the platinum blonde Banshee when they faced each other. They stuck with mostly academy jutsus that he learned as a kid. He shook his head in shame and glanced at Carrie and Yugito, both looked livid and were fuming at the reason most people underestimated Kunoichi. Note to self, Naruto thought, have Kasan give a speech at the academy for future Kunoichi, so we don't have fangirls. The following match was the big eyebrow weirdo wearing a green jumpsuit against the fatty. Naruto was shocked when the fatty turned out to be from the Akamichi clan and used an expansion jutsu. He fought a laugh back when the spandex warrior performed a strong kick and sent the Akamichi bouncing off the walls, literally. When the poor Akamichi stopped, swirls were evident in his eyes and he collapsed from exhaustion. Naruto did feel bad for the guy and felt he'd become a great warrior with more training. The match after that was followed by the Bun Kunoichi and the Suna Kunoichi. It turns out that the Bun girl was a Kenjutsu specialist but lost due to the Suna girl's wind techniques. Naruto thought that if given the chance, Ryu could make a real Kenjutsu specialist out of the bun-haired Tenten. Asuna Kunoichi could become even stronger if she added smaller battle fans to her arsenal, perhaps it could even make her nearly invincible. After that match, the proctor said the words he's been waiting to hear. "Will Inuzuka, Kiba and Uzumaki aim Naruto please come down to the arena?" asked the proctor with a following coughing fit. "Alright. We've got this one in the bag Akamaru," the Inuzuka cried from across the way. His accompanying white puppy yipped in excitement as they leapt down to the arena. Naruto shrugged his jacket off and rolled his shoulders. Yugito took a glance at the blonde next to her and her mouth popped open. "And I thought sensei was ripped." Neji purred in agreement, "Just imagine if he was weeder your mouth was exploring his body or if he was sweating." "Kitten, I want him. I want him I want him I want him I want him." "Neji, stop." Yugito thought in a groan as she was feeling warm all over her body. The demon cat inside her purred in contentment as she watched through her container's eyes as Naruto twisted and loosened his back. The blonde teen was oblivious to the sets of eyes watching him, those of Yugito, Anko, and the other Kunoichi in the room. "Right, this is going to be awesome." Naruto cried as he made a single hand seal and from nowhere a guitar riff began playing, and the guitar riff in question is from a song called Loaded. Naruto hopped onto the rail and threw his hands in front of him, sticking two fingers out and holding them up in front of his face. Nodding his head, Naruto jumped off the rail and performed a single flip and landed on the ground without so much as a sound. He looked at his opponent and grinned. "You want some?" he asked holding his hand out in a taunting manner. "Hajime," the proctor shouted. Kiba charged at Naruto. Get some." Naruto shouted as he ducked under the charging Inuzuka and dug his shoulder into his opponent's gut. He flipped Kiba over his shoulder and charged the small white dog. He slid to a stop and pulled his leg back and kicked the puppy away from him lightly. The dog released a small yelp in surprise and landed on all fours. Naruto grinned and bit down on his thumb. "Well, it's only fair if you get a playmate," Naruto shouted out. Performing the simple symbols, Naruto slammed his hand into the ground and summoned a small orange fox. "Go play with the puppy Taiyu-chan," he instructed the kid. The fox nodded and charged the small white dog, tackling it and beginning a small scuffle between the animals. The Konoha nins watched in amazement as Kiba's warrior dog was tossed around the room by a smaller fox. Kiba growled as he faced Naruto and brought his hands together, Shukaku no Jutsu. Naruto grinned, "To Jutsu, eh? Sweet." Yugito turned to Ryu, "Is he always this cocky? And what was with that music?" Ryu smirked, "He's not always this cocky, but he has reason to be." The Inuzuka clan focuses mostly on teamwork with their companions. Without the puppy, that kid is basically without most of his clan's jutsus. As for the music was his father's idea, Nagato threw in, it's a simple genjutsu that gets your adrenaline flowing and can intimidate opponents or cause them to doubt themselves. Omozu chuckled, it has the side effect of making him the quote, rock star of aim to the females in our village. Whores. Neji shouted in Yugito's head, causing the Jinchuriki to groan. She looked back down to the ring to see Naruto dodge a flying Inuzuka with a split-like drop. He hopped back up to face the enraged face of Kiba. Kiba growled and charged him again. This time, however, Naruto chose to take the offensive by jumping up and interlocking his hands behind Kiba's head. Pulling himself backwards, he caused his knees to be driven into Kiba's face. Kiba flew backwards and landed on his back with his eyes threatening to roll into his head. Naruto rolled his lower body over his own and hopped back up onto his feet by flicking his head up. He grinned and walked over so that he was standing over the near-unconscious Inuzuka and waved his hand in front of his face. Looking over to the proctor, Naruto smiled sheepishly. "Haha, I didn't think the code breaker would take that much out of him," he said with a nervous chuckle, "you might want to check for a concussion." "Come on, Taiyu-chan." The fox summon yipped and trotted back over to her summoner's side while he pulled a small brown treat out. He fed the fox, dismissed her, and then walked calmly over to the injured puppy and gave him a similar treat. The effects were instantaneous as Akamaru jumped to his feet and ran to his partner's side where the medics were working. Naruto chuckled and walked calmly back to his spot on the sidelines, making the same hand seal for his genjutsu to play again. The proctor called his victory as he started ascending the stairs. The music started to fade as did his adrenaline rush. Amoy knocked knuckles with him as did Ryu. Homozu and his uncle gave him approving nods. Kurabi, however. "9, what did I say about revealing your trump card too soon?" he asked smacking the blonde over the head, summoning a fox. "What are you, a newbie?" Naruto winced, "Hey, sensei, chill. The fox contract isn't my trump card anymore." And showing only the CB was the easiest thing to do. Other than summoning, all the others in the competition know about me is that I can summon, have a decent taijutsu and genjutsu. My ninjutsu and onijutsu are still well protected. Kurabi held a firm glare on his prize PROTA tilde GA tilde and then nodded. Yugito was shocked at the actions of her sensei, having never heard him scold someone before. She looked at the blonde enigma with even more determination than before. "Kitten?" Nibi asked. Yugito sighed, "Yes, Nibi. But you maybe look down so I can see his abs?" asked the two-tailed cat innocently. Yugito started to look down before catching herself and blushing furiously. "Nibi." She scolded the cat in her head. The cat's pout could be felt in her mind. Naruto decided against putting his jacket back on for several reasons. First, it was very, very hot now, and the fresh air was cooling him down. Next, he didn't need to hide his physique now that he's shown it to all the competitors, giving him an advantage with intimidation. And finally, the fox insisted that he leave it off so that he could attract possible mates. Not wanting to fight with the fox during the chance to evaluate possible opponents, he accepted and sealed the jacket away into his belt. He watched as Inara and the Oto Kunoichi began fighting. Enko grinned. She was standing across from Naruto and with the use of her snake eye technique could see the heat radiating off his body. Thus also allowing her to see the droplets of sweat travel down his chiseled abs, making her lick her lips. Her friend Kurenai saw this and nudged her in the side. "What are you doing?" she asked Anko. The snake mistress grinned and nodded her head in Naruto's direction. Kurenai followed her stare and her mouth fell agape. She turned on her friend to scold her. "What are you thinking?" she hissed at Anko. "He can't be more than 9 years younger than you." Anko smirked, "So? I already know what he looks like under those loose-fitting pants." Kurenai looked like a fish out of water. Anko laughed as she caught her friend's expression. "Oh, relax Nai-chan," she said waving her hand, "Foxy-chan keeps escaping before I can get him out of his boxers. But he likes to tease more than you do, actually." As the two kept arguing, they didn't notice that 3 more matches had gone by. Naruto did and he went over the results in his head. "Inara won't be a problem, and neither will the Aburam," he thought. "Amoy will drop out whenever I instruct him to, and seeing as he defeated that puppet master, I think he'll be fine if he goes without instructions. The Odo team has been completely defeated, so they're not to be in my head anymore. Kabuto's teammates are both dead or incapacitated. The 2 Hyuga aren't my problem but may get in Samui's way. So that only leaves Gar. He's a pansy ass compared to you," Kit Kyuubi commented. Naruto nodded internally. "I know that, but he is too much of a loose cannon to let go unwatched. Can one of the foxes keep an eye on him without alerting Shukaku?" Naruto asked the Demon King. "Can you possibly get raped by the sexy snake woman?" replied the Kyuubi. "Based on what I've seen, Shukaku only protects his shell while destroying the mental state of his container. If he sees the fox, then he will attack it, but not if you summon a cage kitsune. Latching onto the bastard's shadow will practically keep him invisible, and we will get all the information we need. Be sure to ready one when the finals tournament is set up," Naruto instructed the fox as he looked down to the Hyuga fight. The elder cadet was brutal and playing mind games, basically bullying the young heiress as he attacked her vitals. Naruto scowled. If there was one thing he couldn't stand was bullying for no reason. The girl seemed nice from the way she offered all of the Konoha genin, some kind of medical herb she seemed to make herself. She did nothing to deserve such actions. Seeing the boy, Neji, go in for a fatal attack, Naruto decided he had had enough and performed a Kage Bushin Kawamari. Neji was confused when he saw a poof of smoke instead of Hinata's flying body from his attack. Seeing the blonde aim holding the injured heiress he sneered. "So even aim decides to defend the main branch," Neji sneered. Suddenly feeling the air rush from his body, Neji flew backwards into the wall. He groaned as he fell to his hands and knees and looked up to see 2 of the blondes, one holding Hinata and walking her to a medic and the other holding his knee up and patting it tauntingly with his hand. "I honestly don't give a damn about clan issues," Naruto said as he dismissed a clone that was carrying the heiress, "but what you were doing had nothing to do with clan issues, that was more personal of a fight than I have ever seen. Worse than the Uchiha actually." Neji glared at the aim ninja. "You know nothing. Fate decreed her a failure so I acted and put her in her place." Another blow to the gut was felt, and Neji found himself being held by his hair as Naruto brought his knee back and drove it into his upper stomach, forcing what little breath he had out of his lungs. Neji fell to the ground and coughed violently, droplets of blood following. Naruto knelt down to the downed Hyuga prodigy. "Like I said," Naruto muttered in his ear, "you made that fight personal. So let me clear this with you, if we ever fight, I will show you your errors and then humiliate you in front of your clan. Your eyes will be useless, your defense is broken, you will beg me to put you down. And when that happens you'll be sure to show everyone the truth about you. You are a coward." Naruto walked away, brushing past the Konoha ninjas that were surrounding the two, ready to jump in to prevent another fight. Sarutobi looked solemnly at Naruto, who nodded in respect as he passed. He bowed his head and knew what to expect for the exams. Naruto's informant, a former Konoha medic nin in training, told him of the invasion and of Orochimaru's plans for the Hokage. In a month's time, all hell will break loose on Konoha. Naruto was walking around Konoha's streets. He had several things on his mind. First, was finding one of his many senseis for the finals. In order to find a certain sensei, he had to find the hot springs. Why? Because more than likely his sensei was, as he put it, researching for my novels. Hey, the novels ain't half bad, Kit, Kyuubi said in the boy's mind. Naruto sighed. No, not to an Iro Kitsune like yourself, Baka, thought Naruto as he turned around a corner. Last time I did read one though, you wouldn't stop with the damned images for a month. You didn't argue when you had those dreams, the fox replied slyly. Naruto blushed and ran into a wooden fence post while he wasn't paying attention. Fuck. He yelped as he rubbed his nose. He grumbled until he heard a feminine giggle to his right. Looking up, Naruto smirked as he saw a familiar shade of blonde. Yeah, he said standing and checking for blood, yuck it up. Have a good laugh at the aim klutz. Free of charge, of course. Yugito shook her head at her fellow Jinchuriki's action. You are the worst excuse for a ninja I have ever seen. Naruto wasn't expecting that, so his first reply was, your mom. Yugito rolled her eyes, whatever. Naruto chuckled, sorry, brain fart. It's an epidemic found in the males of my family. Tusan, Iro Jiji, and I are good examples of it. Yugito cocked an eyebrow and shook her head. Like I said, whatever. What are you doing? Shouldn't you be training? Especially since you're going against a Hyuga, she said, hissing Hyuga out. Naruto chuckled. Nah, I know all their jutsus by heart, seeing as my taijutsu is a branch off theirs, replied the sunny-haired blonde. At the sound of silence, Naruto turned to see Yugito looking at him with doubt, awe, and shock all in one. He smiled and gestured for her to follow him. She did, she followed behind him slightly, due to an order from Neji. Look at those shoulders, kitten in that bum, so firm and well built. He's sculpted like a god, Neji said in a hormone-driven state. Yugito fought the blush as she listened to Naruto's description of a taijutsu match he held against a former Hyuga. And so then, Ao-sensei tried to finish me off with a 64 palm attack, said Naruto, as he turned around to see a slightly red Yugito. Hey, are you okay? Yugito's head snapped up, what? Yeah, I'm fine. What's it to you? Naruto shrugged, nothing. You're Kurabi-sensei's new student, so I thought I'd look out for you for him, not to say that you couldn't do so yourself, I just happen to know the area better than most people. I just need to find the women's hot springs. Before he could realize what he said, Yugito smacked him upside the head. Naruto fell straight to the ground and rolled away before a beating could follow. Hentai? She accused with a death glare. She stalked towards Naruto and pulled her fist back. No. Naruto cried, let me explain. Let me explain. Yugito put her fist away and crossed her arms, I'm waiting. Naruto stood up hesitantly and took a deep breath. My Iro Jiji is Jiraiya of the Sannin. He is known mostly for his great abilities in seals, toad summons, and ninjutsu. Most people don't know he's also the author to the Icha Icha series. Yugito blanched. Jiraiya of the Sannin, one of the strongest shinobi in the world, was the author of the most perverted book series known to women. Now that she thought about it, it did make sense, seeing as most men who talked about Jiraiya, her grandfather and sensei for example, always have a small perverted gleam in their eye. She looked back at Naruto and asked, and you need to find a women's Sanoi. Naruto gulped because peeps on women under the excuse of researching. You know the saying, the calm before the storm? Yeah, this could be called the calm before the volcanic eruption. Yugito flipped her lid and snarled before grabbing Naruto's arm and dragging him towards the nearest hot spring. She stopped in front of the building and turned on Naruto. Now you listen to me, Yugito growled. You're gonna find the old fart, drag him to me, and if he's still alive, then you can have him train you. Got me, buddy boy? Naruto nodded before rushing off to the side of the hot springs. Yugito followed him with narrowed eyes and crossed her arms while tapping her finger impatiently. She smirked and thought, finally, I can end those damned books production here and now. The response from Neji wasn't what she expected but was very close in the general area. Did you see how his muscles twitched when you ordered him around? That'd be a fun foreplay method, the bossy bitch and her boy toy slave. Yugito's mind went blank for a response before her blush returned full blast and she sniffed the small trail of blood back up her nose. Her mouth opened and shut for a full minute before her mind started working again. Her response to the two-tailed demon statement was short, simple and showed her agitation. Neji. Naruto froze when he heard Yugito shout the name Neji. Something about that name made him freeze in place. It was then he remembered a previous conversation he had with the fox. Flashback no jutsu. Naruto's mindscape 3 years ago. Naruto walked the familiar hallway built like an eastern palace. That was his mind. He walked through 2 large doors that were connected with the kanji for King. Naruto pushed the doors open and smiled to the horse-sized 9-tailed fox. Hey, Kyuubi-san. He said cheerfully. The fox grunted as he stretched and sat up. He looked down at the 11-year-old blonde that was his container. He was proud of the boy and treated him as his own, going so far as to even give him the Kitsune contract which no one had signed since the battle at the end between the Shodai Hokage and the Uchiha clan leader. The contract was resealed inside of Kyuubi since that battle, and he hadn't offered it to any of his previous containers. "What do you want, Kit?" the fox asked, slightly annoyed his nap was interrupted. Naruto's smile fell as he was seen through yet again by the ancient fox. Naruto fidgeted with his hands before looking up at the fox and asking a question that had been bugging him for a while. "Were you ever married?" The great Kitsune widened his eyes and then looked down at the blonde in shock. Sure, he had asked of his past before, mainly for help with his studies or the understanding of a jutsu. He had never derived so personally before though. "What brings on this question?" Kyuubi asked, slightly diverting the conversation away from an answer. He hoped that the interrogation training he had gone through with the Konoha snake woman a few months ago hadn't stuck and that he wouldn't notice it. "So you were," Naruto deduced. Kyuubi groaned. Of course it would stick. The kid was a sponge when it came to knowledge, soaking it up and storing it away. "I'll ask again," Kyuubi said, "what made you ask me this?" Naruto sighed, "Don't get mad, okay? I was talking to Taichu-san and he told me about how good of a fighter you were before you were dragged away by the Sage of Six Paths and made into the nine-tailed demon fox. He said something about you having met your one and only, but then shut his mouth." Kyuubi growled, "Damn it Taichu, don't get mad at him." "It was a slip of the tongue," Naruto replied, defending the younger fox summon. "I wanted to ask, but he said only you would tell me as the matter was deemed an SS rank secret by the summon clan head, your father. Please tell me, Kyuubi-san. I know I don't ask much about your life seeing as Taichu tells me it willingly, but I really want to know this about you." Kyuubi inwardly smiled at the protective nature towards his original clan, but kept his appearance impassive. He sighed and looked at the pleading boy again. "Fine, Kit. I'll tell you about my mate." Naruto cheered before sitting down on the cushions opposite of Kyuubi and listened intently. Kyuubi told him of how he met his mate, the Nibi no Neko. The incredibly talented fire cat came from the rival Uchiha cat clan. At first, it was insult after insult thrown between the two. It wasn't until the incident with Ichibi that their feelings started to change for one another. They interacted more and more, exploring the world disguised as humans, sharing meals and enjoying the small things. They went even so far as to have a human wedding meant nothing more as a joke. Their first action of being mates came a night over 2,000 years ago. "Hi." Naruto shook his head to rid himself of that memory. "It'll be when hell freezes over that image leaves my mind," he muttered as he resumed walking. The fox laughed loudly at his container's statement. It wasn't long until Naruto heard a familiar giggle and saw the long white hair of his perverted godfather that he knew he found the bastard. Getting him to Yugito was another matter altogether however. Naruto sighed as he knew the only way to get Irojiji's attention was to use his Izen Ryu's favorite henge jutsu from Naruto's old pranking days. Concentrating his chakra into the ram seal, Naruto whispered, "Auric no jutsu." The sound of a puff alerted Jiraiya to being spotted and he hopped up, ready to beat someone for interfering with his research, only to be frozen in spot by a pigtailed blonde with immense on-par Tsunades. He smiled as two trails of blood flowed down his lip and gave the woman two thumbs up. "Way to go, Gaki," he said, "it's even sexier than before. How'd you get the size perfectly matched to the shape? It's not like you've ever seen them." Naruto released the jutsu and snarled, "When you locked me in a closet with only that smut you call a novel for 2 weeks. Of course, Kyuubi had a damn field day. I was scarred for life." "Aw, come on Gaki," Jiraiya said, "it's not like you weren't going to read it anyways." Naruto grabbed Jiraiya by the ear, his weakest spot and hissed loudly, "I was 8 and you're getting the ass kicking many women have promised you for your books. Now." Dragging the great Gama-sanin back to Yugito by his ear, Naruto ignored the pleas and whines his godfather managed to get out. He mentally swore to tell more women who the author of the series was. Heck, he was thinking about making a series that would outsell Icha without being smut-filled. "I'd love to see that," Kyuubi chuckled, "you sitting down for more than 10 seconds without meditating. Stow it, baka," Naruto thought annoyed at the fox's jibe to his attention span. He walked back up to the red Yugito and put his dunce FAA-8 back on. He put a hand on her forehead, checking for a fever. What are you doing?" Yugito asked, shocked at the sudden contact. "You're all red," Naruto replied, "I thought you might be sick, so I'm checking for a fever." "You do seem really warm." "I'm fine," Yugito snapped, pushing his hand away. She looked away to see his hand locked on the ear of a white-haired old man. Raising her eyebrow, she looked back to Naruto and asked, "This is Jiraiya of the Sannin." "It's the pervert all right," Naruto said, releasing his perverted godfather's ear, right down to the last wart. Jiraiya rubbed his sore ear and glared at the blonde. "Hey, I do not have warts." "But you are a pervert," Naruto said. Jiraiya shook his head, "No I'm not." "Oh really?" Yugito asked with a glare, "What non-perverted man goes around spying on women in hot springs for research?" "Not a pervert," Jiraiya said again. He puffed his chest out and put his hands on his hips proudly and announced, "I'm a super pervert." Naruto face palmed, "Right. Like I said, he's the super pervert that writes Icha Icha." Yugito scowled as Jiraiya looked her over. He walked around her with his hand on his chin in a thinking manner. He turned to Naruto with his thumbs up. "I approve. Way to bag him, Gaki." Jiraiya praised, "You finally got a girlfriend, huh?" Both blondes turned bright red and replied simultaneously, "No." Jiraiya looked confused before slamming his fist into his open palm, "So it's a strictly no relationship sex scandal. Brilliant, Gaki. Just brilliant. Man, I wish I was like you when I was your age." Naruto turned even a darker shade of red and kneed his godfather in the groin, Iro Baka. Jiraiya fell to his knees as he clutched his family jewels. Tears rained down his face as he sobbed silently and tried to get feeling back below the belt. Naruto was turned away from Jiraiya and Yugito, fighting the blush that was evident on his face. Yugito looked down at Jiraiya's pitiful form with a smirk. "Serves you right," she said. Later, after Jiraiya had been chewed out and informed of their acquaintance with one another, Naruto led Jiraiya and Yugito to a training ground near a cliff. He wanted Jiraiya to look at his seal and wanted to ask Yugito something about her demon, if she actually had it. "What are we doing out here, Gaki?" Jiraiya asked, miffed that he was dragged away from his prized activity. The blonde turned around and nodded to the old toad Sanin. "I need you to check my seal," Naruto said, "make sure everything is intact." "You run into team again?" Jiraiya asked as he realized the seriousness of his godson. To his relief, Naruto shook his head. "No, ran into Manda, but I just want to make sure no one did anything during the prelims," the blonde replied. Yugito watched the interaction with interest. At first, she was afraid of the implications Naruto meant when he had said seal, but now curiosity coursed through the blonde Kumo Jinchuriki's mind. Naruto stripped his mesh shirt off and focused his chakra. Yugito was originally surprised by the amount of chakra the other blonde released. She was even more surprised to see the detailed seal appearing around his navel and covering 2/3 of his abdominals. "Those are amazing abs," Nibi thought, disrupting Yugito's original train of thought as her head slowly nodded. A pink tint covered Yugito's face as she cursed the cat's perverse mind. Jiraiya was knelt in front of the boy, studying the seal he had become very familiar with over the years. It never ceased to amaze him what a genius Minato was for making a complex seal under so much pressure with so little time, and on top of that it allowed Naruto to draw strength from the fox's chakra. As he looked over the seal he looked at the 10 tomos added by the blonde in front of him that were used to help focus the chakra even more, eventually mixing his own chakra well with the fox's. And the genius gene passed on with Naruto, thought the toad sage smugly, full of pride for the blonde that was under his amorphin's care. "Looks fine to me," Jiraiya said, standing up, "You add something, though?" Naruto shook his head, "Aside from my tomo markings, everything is as the yondaime left it." Yugito's eyes widened. "The yondaime?" She thought, "But that means, oh my Kamis Kaiokun's Jinchuriki." Nibi squealed, "We have to have him now. I want my Kaio-kun." Yugito held her head as the Nibi kept ranting about wanting her Kaio-kun now. She didn't notice that Naruto was now standing in front of her until he clapped his hands once in front of her. "Welcome back to the realm of the living," he said with a smile. She scowled at him before crossing her arms. "Why didn't you tell me you were a Jinchuriki?" asked the slightly miffed Yugito. Naruto smirked and crossed his own arms, which Yugito noticed were well developed for someone his age. "I could ask you the same thing," he replied. Jiraiya's eyes widened at his godson's words and looked at the girl once again. He put a hand on his head and groaned. "That's why I thought I heard about you," he muttered, "Nibi no Neko's Jinchuriki from Kumo. She's under tutelage from Kurabi-sensei," Naruto said. "I had an idea you were a Jinchuriki as sensei doesn't usually take pupils unless they're like us." Yugito sputtered for a moment before recompassing yourself. "Yeah, well you still didn't tell me you were one. Did you ever ask?" Naruto countered. Yugito huffed and shooshined away in a flash of lightning. After making a silencing jutsu active around them, he looked back at Jiraiya. "I need to find Nai-san and kiss him," he told Jiraiya. Jiraiya nodded. "I'll look into it," he said. "Last I heard they were securing a base in Kusa. Getting word to them will take a few days." "How long do you have?" "A month," Naruto said. "I just need info on the Byakugan, and I know Nai-san has info on it because of his Sharingan." Jiraiya nodded. "I'll see what I can do. Any other word you want to get out?" "Call Zetsu out of Odo," Naruto said, "and get Haiden and Kakazu ready for their departure to Kiri. Have the Mamachi meet them in Wave." Jiraiya nodded. "Got it. Looks like your father's plans are coming into play." Naruto grinned. "They're your plans, Irojiji. The time has come to end the madness." Jiraiya nodded and ruffled the blonde's hair. "Kiri will be the first in the alliance. That I'm sure of. This wouldn't be possible without your team, Naruto. Kushina would be happy and Minato would be proud." Naruto smiled. "Their names will live on as well. The lands of Yuzuthi lands will be mine again after the civil war is over, right?" Jiraiya nodded, the leader of the alliance has promised that the Isle of Whirlpools will belong to the Uzumaki clan once again. Nagato will be named clan head and given a place on their council, as well as becoming AIM's ambassador. Naruto thought before saying, then all that's left is the Konoha invasion. I'm still surprised you want to save Konoha, Jiraiya said. Naruto snarled. I'm not doing it for me, he replied harshly, no, once the alliance is formed, Konoha will end its reign as the most powerful country. I told you before, I'm doing this for the memory of the Yondaime, because obviously these people don't respect their Hokage, they depend on them. Jiraiya nodded and put a hand on Naruto's shoulder, it's a good cause, Naruto. These people have lost all sight of the word peace. Naruto shrugged it off and walked away, they will only know pain, then. Naruto grinned after reading it again. Knowing that Kisame and his Nai-san would be in attendance would only help against the invasion. He rolled the scroll up and turned to look back at his clones. They had all stopped training and were one by one dispelling themselves. Naruto narrowed his eyes and picked up one of the mass-enhanced kunai he used as a dumbbell. He scanned the area before a familiar chill ran up his spine and his eyes widened. A kunai flew out from the woods and grazed his cheek. Naruto jumped away and was suddenly subdued by a pair of arms that belonged to a familiar purple-haired kunoichi. I found you, Foxy-chan, Anko whispered into Naruto's ear. Naruto gulped. Hi Anko-chan, he stuttered out, what brings you here? Anko ran her hand up and down his chest and abdominals, well, word on the street is you've been hanging out with a Kumo kunoichi. Naruto nodded, feeling the sweat in her assets push into his back again. Swallowing back the urges the fox was sending him, Naruto tried to come up with a coherent thought. What's wrong, Foxy-chan? Anko teased, are my boobies not enough for you anymore? Maybe it's time you saw something else, then. Naruto's eyes widened at her implications and he squirmed away from the snake woman of Konoha. He leapt another foot away from her before she could pull him back into a glomp. Anko pouted before grinning once again and leaping at the shirtless AIM blonde. Naruto yelped before dashing away into the woods, dropping his kunai as he left. Come on, Foxy-chan. Anko shouted after him as she followed, you know you want me. The kunai Naruto dropped before he ran off changed back into a smirking blonde as he watched the Takebetsu Jonin chase after his shadow clone. He picked his other two kunai up and pulled the scrolls off each of them that made them both 100 pounds. Storing the kunai away for later, Naruto pulled his mesh shirt back on and shoe-shined in a waterspout back to the Ichiraku stand. Walking out of his waterspout shunshin, Naruto took his spot at his newly favorite ramen stand. AM rested her arms on the counter and smiled at the golden blonde that had become a familiar customer over the past few weeks. The usual, Naruto? She asked. Naruto grinned. I swear you know me too well, AM-chan, replied the blonde. AM giggled and then went to work on making his order. Naruto sighed as he relaxed into the scent of the ramen stand. He smiled as he thought about the luxurious ramen he had discovered and was still trying to figure out a way to get the Ichiraku to move to AM. The flapping of the curtains announced the arrival of a familiar dark-skinned teen. Naruto smiled as he looked to his right where the teen sat down. Everything going okay, Amoy? He asked his Kumo friend. Amoy chuckled. As far as I'm concerned it is, the young swordsman replied, although Yugito-san has been more relaxed since you two have been sparring. Naruto chuckled, hey that was her idea. Amoy chuckled. He wouldn't admit it, but even he would relax around the blonde AIM shinobi. It shouldn't surprise him that his sensei's pupil would relax too. AM returned with Naruto's order and was introduced to another of the blonde's friends. She wondered if he'd be the same way if he had grown up in Konoha. Naruto began devouring his meal at a neutral pace, much to the disbelieving eyes of some passerbys. A few minutes later, Naruto was patting his full stomach and reclining against the counter. He looked over his shoulder at AM and said, man, AM-chan, you sure you don't want to move to AM? I'm telling you, you'd make a killing. AM giggled, that's not up to me, Naruto. Naruto shrugged and swiveled around in his seat to smile at her, well who do I have to convince? AM giggled again before her attention diverted to behind him. Amoy followed her gaze and swore under his breath. Standing behind Naruto was a red-headed Suna shinobi with his intense stare locked on Naruto. Naruto shrugged the killing intent off and turned around to smile at the Ichibi Jinchuriki. Well if it isn't Sabaku no Gaara, Naruto said, shouldn't you be studying for your fight against the Uchiha? Gaara remained stoic and replied, he does not concern me. Mother cries for your blood and your blood alone. Naruto noted AM's gasp of shock and promptly glared at the unstable shinobi, would you like to take this somewhere else or wait until the exams when we can kill each other legally? Gaara's insane grin grew to immense proportions and he replied, I'm going to enjoy your death Uzumaki AIM Naruto. You will show me how to truly feel alive. After his rather disturbing comment, Gaara vanished in a sand shoeshine. Naruto sighed and ran a hand through his hair and turned around to face AM. Smiling at the young chef, Naruto said, I apologize for Gaara's eccentric behavior, AM-chan. He isn't mentally stable, something I plan on fixing. AM had a worried look on her face, but before she could comment further, Naruto vanished in his signature shoeshine. On the counter was the proper amount for his meal and a wealthy tip. Along with that was a note. Having read said note, Amoy left with a chuckle and a goodbye to AM. He shook his head at his Taichu's obsession. It seems that Ichiraku's may be moving to AIM after all, Amoy thought with a smirk when he heard a sound of a joyful cry come from the establishment. Naruto walked the faintly familiar slums of Konoha. He paused outside of an alleyway that was very familiar. The scent of his own blood and memories of hate-filled cries filled the blonde's head. Walking into the alleyway, he became aware that he was being followed. His stalker made no attempts to hide herself in the shadows as she landed with a light thump behind him. Naruto ignored the Kumo Chunin and walked further into the alley, making a right behind a building and looking down at a familiar cardboard box. Putting his hand on the box, a memory of a rainy night filled the AIM's mind. Fighting the tears back, Naruto looked inside the box to see if he couldn't find what he was searching for. Yugito watched with curiosity as Naruto dug around through a pile of garbage. She knew he was a Jinchuriki and that most Jinchuriki don't lead favorable lives, but she was still lost as to what he could possibly find in the pile. She walked closer, knowing he'd sensed her earlier, for a better view. When he backed out of the pile, he turned around and rested against the wall of the building as he clutched something to his chest. Even in the dim light and with her enhanced senses, she barely noticed that Naruto was crying. Naruto clutched his stuffed fox closer to him. It was and always would be his most prized possession. He hadn't even noticed he lost it until he and his adoptive family were far from Konoha, on the border with the Land of Wind. He had been upset for several weeks, not even cheering up when they made frequent stops at ramen shops. As he looked back, he could tell his two-sen was enraged towards the village he used to call home, more so than his uncle was. Naruto pulled the small stuffed animal away from his body and wiped his thumb over the dusted glass eye and smiled. One mission accomplished, he whispered to himself. Sealing the toy fox away in a scroll he had brought along just for the occasion, Naruto wiped his eyes dry before standing up and walking back out the alleyway. Yugito watched her fellow blonde as he left the alleyway. Once she knew he was gone, she approached the pile he had left behind. She knelt down and looked at the cardboard box that was before her. Inside was a pile of old ragged clothes that were no longer wearable crumpled together in a makeshift pillow. More rags were near the boxes outside. He used them for blankets. She thought confused. Yugito wasn't aware of how the enigma of Naruto that was always so bright and sunny came from such a dismal place. Dark origins bring about appreciation for life, kitten, Nibi informed her. Yugito frowned. This is how he was treated. Granted Karabi-sensei and I had to work hard to get appreciation in Kumo, but wouldn't the Hokage have interfered for the protection of his weapon? The Kumo Jinchuriki thought. She felt the two-tailed cat chuckle darkly. Not all Jinchuriki are trained from birth like you, kitten, Nibi said, causing Yugito's frown to deepen. She hadn't thought of that. Clenching her fists, Yugito decided she was going to get answers about the happy-go-lucky blonde from AIM. Apparently there was more to him than his strength. Naruto walked into his apartment feeling slightly accomplished with finding something dear to him. Now all he had to find was the photo album that the Sandaime hid and the last scroll that belonged to his father. The scroll that contained the Hirishin. A wry chuckle alerted him to someone else being in the room, but the voice stopped him from acting. My. You have grown, Naruto-kun. Naruto smiled and turned to see the Sandaime Hokage sitting on the couch. He bowed respectively and said, an honor to have you visit me, Jiji. Looking up with a smirk he continued, or are you trying to escape your paperwork again? Sarutobi chuckled and motioned for Naruto to sit across from him, which he did. He took in all the new features about the blonde. His hair was much longer, his bangs framing his face much like his father. The visible muscle he noted was that of an athlete that performed strength and agility activities. Sarutobi smiled as he lit his pipe and took a few puffs. Perhaps sending him away wasn't the worst idea he'd ever had. How have you been, Naruto? Asked the old Hokage. Naruto smiled. I've been good, Jiji, he replied. Tusan and Kasan asked me to invite you for a stay at AIM sometime. You could use a vacation from the paperwork after all. Sarutobi laughed and nodded that I could. Now, what's this about an invasion? Are you sure your information is accurate? Naruto became serious and activated a silencing jutsu on the apartment room. He leant forward and pulled a scroll out from his jacket and unfurled it on the coffee table between them. Appearing from the scroll was a holographic map of the elemental nations, not that unlike of Jireya's informative scrolls. Pointing at a small area known as the Land of Rice, Naruto said, Iro Jiji and I have several informants currently hiding in Atagakur. One of mine you may have heard of, Zetsu. Sarutobi almost lost his pipe from his mouth when it popped open in shock. Zetsu is still alive. But how? I thought he died along with Mandara back with Sensei. Naruto growled at the mention of the Uchiha leader. No, Zetsu has been alive for a long time now. However, he has changed his appearance to more suit his needs. It is also apparent that Ichihamandara is alive. What? Roared the Sandaime in shock. He looked at the blonde for hints of a joke, but there were none. Naruto waited for his grandfather to calm down before continuing. His whereabouts are unknown, but I believe he is manipulating Orochimaru and the Yondaime Mizukage, Naruto said. As you know, the Yondaime Mizukage is a Jinchuriki like myself, holding the three-tailed turtle. I believe it is through his bastard eye that Madara controls him. How are you going to deal with that? Sarutobi asked the blonde. Naruto sighed and rubbed his forehead. Dusan is currently planning more details on that with our sabotage expert and one of our commanders, he said. Ka-san is trying to recruit at least one more village to assist the rebels. Sarutobi nodded. What else are you currently working on? Aiwa has been too quiet lately, Naruto said. Hirojiji and I are planning a spy op that will take place in the next few months. Naruto continued informing his grandfather of his country's plans. Sarutobi wasn't thrilled that Naruto would be so quick to dismiss the villagers of Konoha, but under the circumstances, he could understand. The two eventually drifted away from serious conversation and started conversing on a fraternal level. The next day, Naruto sought out a certain Kumo Kunoichi in order to do something he had been thinking about doing for a while now. This idea had come up when Sandaime was teasing him about being seen with the Kumo Chunin that was accompanying the Kumo team. He sighed as he heard a familiar chuckle in the back of his mind. It's about time that you chose someone as your first mate, muttered the fatherly voice of the Kyuubi, and with Nibi's container no less, it's as if you're trying for my approval, kid. Ah, shut up fuzzball, Naruto retorted. He walked up to the hotel that Amoy told him they were staying at and took in a deep breath. Walking into the hotel he smiled at the concierge behind the counter, who didn't notice him. Excuse me, he said, gaining the woman's attention. She looked up and smiled at the attractive teen before her. Why hello there, she said, and what can I do to help you? I'm looking for the Kumagakure team rooms, Naruto said. Where can I find them? Looking slightly depressed, the girl told him, third floor from the top, rooms 403 and 405. Naruto nodded and walked away from the desk. He shoeshined to the required floors and walked along the hallways to find the rooms. He knocked on the door of 403 and Kurabi opened the door. Hey number 9, Kurabi said, rubbing his eye with the back of his fist, don't you know the time? It's 9 in the morning fool, can't you wait till a guy gets a cup of joe? Naruto's sweat dropped and scratched the back of his head. Is Yugito-chan still sleeping or is she out training? Do is out looking for you. Kurabi rapped, get moving or she'll lose a fuse, yo. Naruto chuckled nervously and slowly backed away. Yeah, thanks sensei. See you around. After quickly walking away from his eccentric sensei, Naruto shoeshined back to the raiment stand he usually found himself at. Spotting a familiar shade of blonde hair, Naruto smirked as he walked up behind the Kumo Chunin. Leaning into her ear, he whispered, boo. Yugito jumped and turned around to glare at the sunny blonde that snuck up on her. Naruto laughed quietly to himself and smiled at her. The girl whacked him over the head, causing him to laugh slightly louder. Fuming, Yugito crossed her arms and glared at the blonde that continued to surprise her. What do you want, Baka? She asked. Naruto chuckled and put his hands away into his pockets. Ah, nothing much, he replied before looking away. Yugito noticed the hesitation in his voice and raised an eyebrow. What's wrong, Uzumaki? Naruto chuckled nervously. Nothing's wrong with Miyugi-chan. Yugito blinked at the sudden abbreviation of her name. Sure, he'd call her kitty cat or the occasional kitten, which she heard enough from Nibi, but he'd never shortened her name before. And there was a slight hint of emotion behind the name, something that had made her stomach do a flip. Naruto looked from Yugito's face to the wall more times than he blinked before she noticed a slight red tint on his face. I, wanted to ask you, Naruto started before mumbling the rest of what he wanted to say out. Yugito rolled her eyes. Come on, it can't be that hard, she said, just spit it out, Baka. Naruto took a deep breath before saying all in once, will you go Tanadadutham? Yugito blinked before the incoherent sentence ran through slowly in her mind. Her heart sped up and her breathing hitched. Did he just ask me out? She thought as her face turned red. Nibi purred in the back of her mind. Do it kitten. Then you're only one step away from bringing me and Kaio-kun back together. And the positions Kaio-kun and I know combined with both of your stamina, Nibi. Yugito thought as her face flushed a deeper shade of red. She looked at the blonde that had just asked her out. Sure, he wasn't the first to do so, plenty of other boys back in Kumo had asked her out. She didn't care though, as once she had overheard a boy who had gone out with her later brag to his friends about how he would score the demon. That guy got an ass kicking and it swore Yugito off dating. She was sure she wouldn't find anyone so she focused on her training. Naruto was different though. He obviously knew the harsh reality of being a human sacrifice. Yugito knew he wasn't going after her for bragging rights, he did know if she wanted to, she could kick his ass. Then there was the fact that she herself was actually planning on asking him out sometime, had she ever found the courage to do so. Naruto sighed. Of course she wouldn't want to go out with him, he was a goofball after all. The sad reality was he would only attract fangirl Sananko. He looked back at Yugito with a sad smile. "It's okay if you don't want to," Naruto said. Yugito's eyes widened. "Oh no. He thinks I don't want to. Say something. Quick," she thought. Nebi threw in her own thoughts. "Push him against the wall and ravish his lips for your own." The cat thought perversely. "So if you just want to stay free and yes." Yugito cried out, interrupting him. Naruto looked up from his apology with a look of shock. She said yes. He thought confused. Yugito realized her outburst had confused him and continued, I mean, yes. I'd like to go out with you, Naruto." Naruto smiled brightly, "Gee great. So, when do you, want to go out on the town?" Yugito blushed and looked down at her hands. How about we go out for dinner?" Naruto grinned, "Okay. We'll meet in front of your hotel at 5, does that work?" Yugito smiled and nodded, "Yeah that works." "Alrighty then," Naruto said, forming a hand seal and winking at her. "See ya at 5, kitten." Before she could register the pet name, he vanished in a waterspout shoeshine. Yugito realized two things. First, Naruto had gotten away with calling her one of her least favorite nicknames, again, and second, she needed to talk to Samui and Carrie now. Yugito vanished in a lightning shoeshine back to the apartment. Naruto tried hard to sneak back into his apartment room without alerting his teammates. It was going great so far if you count running into several people because you were dazed out of your mind, great at being stealthy. Naruto carefully slid the key into the lock and turned the handle, and using his bloodline, he checked to make sure Ryu and Homozu were still asleep. Homozu lay stoic in his bed, the blanket covering his whole body aside from his head, and Ryu was sprawled in every direction you could think of, along with a small tent forming near his. "Oh come on, Ryu," Naruto muttered as he stopped looking through the water particles in the air. Pushing the door open slightly, Naruto used his actual stealth to sneak back towards his room. He had to plan out the night he had ahead of him without Ryu finding out. Little known to others outside of his circle, Naruto hadn't ever been on a date before. Oh sure, plenty of AIM nobles and royalty tried to pair him up with their daughters, sisters, or even on one occasion, their widowed mothers. But those weren't what Naruto considered real dates to be, seeing as he had no taste in someone who was spoiled rotten by money or just wanted him for power. These two traits often crossed a lot of women out of his mind. Basically he only looked at Kunoichi, as he planned on restarting the Uzumaki clan name, considering his uncle has no desire to pass on the Rinnegan with several wives. Naruto felt like he was home free until a familiar Doton jutsu bound his feet to the ground. He sighed. "Those were mud clones weren't they?" he asked a green-eyed genius that was standing behind the open door. Homozu stepped out and shut the door with a smirk and nodded. Ryu rounded the corner and smirked at the blonde before putting his arm around his captain's neck. "Uzumaki, I'm so proud of you," he said overdramatically, going out with a hot eye like Nai Yugito. "Just wait until Jiraiya-sensei finds out." It was then Ryu found himself embedded into the wall of their apartment living room. He groaned and froze when a guttural growl of anger erupted from the blonde. Feeling a hand tighten around the collar of his shirt and looked into the narrowed blue eyes of his friend, which were now slitted and had flecks of crimson in them. He smiled and chuckled nervously as he was pushed further into the wall. "Irojiji doesn't find out about this," Naruto growled out, "am I clear?" Omozu and Ryu both nodded. When he wanted to be, Naruto could be downright scary, and both knew better than to get on his bad side about something as serious to him as this. They all heard a light chuckle and turned to see their Rinnegan gifted sensei watching them with an amused smirk on his face. Now, Rudo," started Nagato, "I don't think you should be beating your friends up over some harmless teasing." Naruto growled and let go of Ryu, who promptly shoeshined away from the Jinchuriki and hid behind Homozu's smaller form. Nagato smiled as his nephew glared at his friends and turned to walk back to his room, muttering about needing to be fully rested for his date. Nagato could tell Ryu was holding back the urge to reply to his mutter with a sexual-oriented joke. Later that night, Yugito was pacing her shared room while Carrie and Samui watched with amusement. They had never seen the girl so worked up about something like this before, and it nearly drove both of them to hysterics. Out of respect for their friend, however, they kept quiet. They had spent the morning going over possible scenarios with her and constantly explaining, as they both knew the blonde boy better than she herself did, that he was not trying to take advantage of her. Yugito paused in front of the mirror and smoothed her purple dress down again. It was a simple dress that reached down to the middle of her calves but allowed her to fully move unrestrained. She stopped messing with her dress and turned to her French braided ponytail. She had redone it several times over the past 20 minutes. "Kitten, relax," Nebi purred, "your Tom will be very, very attracted to you. Even more so, seeing as he's Kaiokun's container. So my advice, have Chunin then go back to his room and ride him until Nebi knock it off." Yugito thought as images of her and Naruto in rather promiscuous poses were sent to the forethought of her mind, no thanks to the Neko. Her face turned beet red as she tried to calm herself down. A chime alerted her to the time and she took one last glance at Carrie and Samui. Carrie gave her a thumbs up and said, "Knock Taichu out, Yugito." Samui gave her sister a smile and opened the door. Before Yugito left the room her sister whispered, "Remember what we said and ignore Nebi." Yugito smirked and nodded as the cat whined in her head about not being listened to. Calmly walking a few feet away to the hotel elevator, she paused as she was about to hit the button and cursed herself for being so absent-minded. Yugito, she thought, "you're a kunoichi." Forming a single hand seal, Yugito vanished in a shoeshine of lightning to meet her date outside of the hotel. Appearing in front of several shocked civilians, Yugito ignored the looks of jealousy from the girls and the looks of lust from the boys. She was scanning the crowd for a certain boy that had been occupying her mind ever since she arrived in the godforsaken village. She was about to start walking away from the hotel when a hand rested on her shoulder. She turned, ready to punch someone in the face, only to come face to face with the one she was looking for. "Well, that's a nice way to greet your date," Naruto joked. Yugito blushed and muttered an apology out. Naruto waved it off. Don't worry about it, Yugi-chan," he said, causing her blush to darken. "It's not your fault I keep sneaking up on you." She growled at him for the jibe to her ninja senses. Naruto laughed quietly as he held his hands up in defense and explaining he was just kidding. Yugito took this moment to look over what Naruto was wearing. Aside from his usual choice in going barefoot, his attire had changed. Instead of a mesh shirt, he was wearing a dark blue flannel jacket over a black t-shirt with black slacks, which were slightly folded up at the bottom to keep from dragging on the ground. Without his head-eye scarf, she probably wouldn't have recognized him because his hair was pulled into a longer ponytail to keep his bangs out of his eyes. Yugito had to admit, he cleaned up pretty good when he didn't have to be on duty. Although he'd probably look much better without any clothes at all, the horny cat muttered in her head. Yugito blushed and cursed the cat before outwardly smiling to Naruto. "I get it, Baka," she said, "you were kidding. You'd better watch yourself though." Naruto nodded and held his arm out. "Care to accompany me then? After all, I wouldn't want to risk someone better looking than me stealing a beautiful woman off my hands." Yugito blushed at the compliment and hesitantly interlocked her arm with his. He led her down the road and they immersed themselves in conversation quickly to kill any awkwardness before it could arrive. They started on the topic of their pasts at Yugito's request and Yugito was shocked to learn that Naruto did in fact live the first 4 years of his life here. He didn't want to go any deeper on that but informed her of his life traveling with his parents and uncle, again shocking her when she found out he was his sensei. They paused their conversation when they arrived at a steakhouse Homozu had recommended to Naruto when he and Carrie returned from his promised dinner. Yugito had heard a good deal about the excellent service from her dark-skinned friend, more so about the manners Homozu had shown to her. Naruto had requested a small booth so they could converse in peace and flashed a card to the waiter that made him smile widely. The waiter led them to a small booth in the corner, surrounded only by an elderly couple that sat at a table nearby who sent smiles to both blondes. The elder woman had said something along the lines of, "Do you remember when we were like them, Koi?" The comment made both blondes blush and avoid each other's gaze for the first few minutes of the time they sat down. Eventually they resumed their conversation and found themselves laughing when Naruto brought up his relationship with the snake woman Yugito had noticed was staring at him during the preliminaries. "So then I have to fling the damn snake off my leg and somehow get out of the shackles before she can get my pants off," Naruto said with a laugh. Yugito laughed at his misfortune. "Is she really that determined?" she asked the AIM blonde, who nodded his head. "I have no clue what I did either," he exclaimed throwing his hands in the air. "I mean sure there was the time she accidentally walked in on me when I was drying off." Yugito was immediately hit by a barrage of naughty pictures from the two-tailed demon inside her and swore under her breath whilst she fought to keep the temperature of her face the same level it had been for the past 20 minutes. Naruto looked at her worried for a few minutes before a snicker from the fox in his own mind alerted him to something he didn't know about. Quietly, Kyuubi informed Naruto on how Nebi was cursed after upsetting Kami by desiring kittens of her own, making her incredibly horny, but she would be unable to conceive any of her own. Naruto blinked before Kyuubi elaborated by saying she was a sex addict. Trying to keep the thoughts that were now doubt inspired by a certain perverted sage, elsewhere, a white-haired man sneezed, causing the hot springs visitors he was peeping on to attack him brutally while he cursed his godson, whom he was sure did something to cause this. Naruto changed the subject quickly as their orders arrived. They enjoyed a nice meal with more table-appropriate conversation and were approached by a photographer who was hired by a certain blue-haired AIM noble to send information occasionally on her son, who took their picture. After dinner, Naruto took it upon himself to take Yugito to the Hokage's office and properly introduce her to his grandfather, who he said actually given him the courage to ask her out. They were not aware, however, of the two pig-tailed blonde in the room with them. The two were arguing over something, but the argument was lost as Naruto barged in with Yugito in tow. Yugito was in awe as Tsunade of the Sannin was standing before her, one of her heroes live in person. As she was currently trying to comprehend the situation, Naruto had already accepted who was there and promptly announced their arrival. "Hi Gigi. Hi Bachan." Naruto only had seconds before a chair came flying at him from his ever-loving godmother Tsunade. Currently, said super medic had a tick on her head and was glaring daggers at the sunny blonde Jinchuriki. A look of disappointment was on the Hokage's face as he realized his student hadn't changed at all and would probably decline his offer to the end. Tsunade's first student and age Shizune was clutching the pig Tun as she watched the event with embarrassment written on her features. Yugito's jaw was slack as she was staring at her date with disbelief as he called another of the Sannin a fraternal name. And Naruto. He had a smug smile on his face. Naruto scat as he looked behind him where an injured Chunin lay under a very heavy chair. He turned back to Tsunade, who looked livid and said, "Now, Bachan, that wasn't nice. What did that chair ever do to you?" Tsunade gave a war cry as she charged the blonde boy, who simply stepped to the side and Sunshine to the Hokage's side. He looked over at the Hokage and said, "Did I decide to come at a bad time? All I wanted to do was introduce you to Yugi-chan." Shizune, who acted as an older sister figure to Naruto, cocked an eyebrow at this and looked back over to the pale blonde teen that was looking at Naruto in shock. Looking her over, she saw that the girl was dressed well, as though she had just come from a. It hit Shizune like a brick and she looked at Naruto with a beaming smile. "You're on a date." Naruto winced at the shriek his Ni-chan made and nodded as he rubbed his sore ear. Shizune squealed again and dropped Tun before hugging Naruto tightly. Naruto made exaggerated gasps for air as Tsunade walked back into the room. She had barely registered what her apprentice had said and looked over the younger blonde girl, who was now bright red and glaring daggers at Shizune. Tsunade grinned. Finally, she had blackmail on him. Oh, it felt good to have power once again. "The brat has a date?" she asked when Shizune finally released Naruto. Naruto took in some deep breaths and nodded. Tsunade grinned before saying, "Wait until I tell Konan." Yugito saw a look of dread come over Naruto's face, along with a stripe of red that covered his face, and nearly burst out laughing when he collapsed to Tsunade's leg and hugged it tightly and pleaded, "Please don't tell Ka-san. Please. Please." It was humorous to say the least to see one of the strongest genin Yugito had ever met at one of the Sannin's feet, begging her not to tell his mother for some unknown reason. She raised an eyebrow before clearing her throat, reminding all parties that she had indeed remained where she was. When all eyes returned to her, Yugito suddenly felt very small and looked away from them. "Please don't discuss matters that concern me as if I wasn't in the room," she said quietly, berating herself for feeling so weak in front of two very strong shinobi. She felt a hand on her shoulder and looked up to see Naruto smiling sheepishly at her. "Sorry, Yugi-chan," he said, releasing her shoulder and rubbing the back of his head. Looking more confident, Yugito managed to put a smile on her face before facing Tsunade and bowing. "It's an honor to be in the presence of the only sane member of the Sannin," she said. Naruto chuckled as Tsunade had a large grin on her face and looked at him. "Oh, I like her, Gaki," she said before turning back to Yugito. "Thank you, Ms. Nai Yugito, Chunin of Amegakure, ma'am," Yugito replied as she righted herself. Tsunade whistled, "Chunin, eh? Well, hopefully if Gaki fails this year, you can whip him back into shape for the next tournament. That'll be at your home field advantage." Naruto scowled, "Oi. Bachan, don't say that." Yugito smacked Naruto over the back of the head, "Don't disrespect Tsunade-sama. She's one of the strongest kunoichi in the world." Naruto pouted playfully at her, "Aw, but Yugi-chan, you let me call Iro Jiji." As Tsunade laughed, the Hokage and Shizune looked at Yugito, who rolled her eyes and said, "That's because he is a perverted grandfather. Tsunade has to be in the best shape for a kunoichi with a record such as hers. Are you talking about the drinking or the gambling debts?" Sarutobi threw in with a smirk. Tsunade turned red at the jibe, Yugito's eyes bugged out of her head, whilst Naruto laughed at the look on the other two blondes' faces. Both blondes turned angrily at the AIM male who suddenly silenced under the amount of killing intent they were sending his way. Sarutobi coughed, regaining everyone's attention. "As fun as this is," he said, "I'm sorry, but I'll have to ask that you and your date have to leave, Naruto-kun. Tsunade and I have much to discuss on matters over our my village." Naruto shrugged and smiled, "Hey, at least it's a break from the paperwork you and Tusan despise so much. Thanks for your time, Gigi. Nice to see you so soon, Bachan, Shizune Ni-chan. See you at the exams." Grabbing a hold of Yugito's hand, Naruto vanished in his signature Yuzu Shunshin. Tsunade and Sarutobi chuckled before the Hokage relit his pipe and took a deep inhale. Exhaling, he turned to Tsunade and said, "This is all the more reason for you to become Godame. Naruto holds no favor to the village, and were it not for Jiraiya or myself, he would pass us away and just allow Orochimaru to destroy us. We need to be seen favorably in his eyes once again, Tsunade." Tsunade sighed and ran a hand through her hair. I won't like it, but I'll do it on one condition. A few days later in Amegakure, an orange-haired man yawned as he stretched and rose from his bed, not before looking down at his sleeping wife with a smile. He brushed a few stray strands of blue hair out of her face and traced her lips with his thumb. The woman sighed blissfully and his smile grew. Turning away he heard a small mutter of Haiko-kun, and his grin grew to perverted proportions, something he accidentally picked up from his sensei. He leant back down and kissed her forehead. Separating his person from his wife's sleeping form, the man showered and dressed in the standard Amekage robes and headed over to his workplace, the lakeside cage tower. He greeted several small business owners as they opened up shop and others who were already beginning chores throughout the village. His smile returned as he looked up to the sky and thought about his brother and his son, how they were faring in the Chunin exams. Entering the tower, he assigned several Anbu to their duties, picking 2 to watch over his wife and home, and then began filing through his newest arch-nemesis. Paperwork. He just didn't understand how it piled up again and again. A knock at his door alerted him to an arrival, and he called, "Enter." The red-headed man wearing Aim's traditional cloak was followed by a blonde with a ponytail and his bangs, covering a robotic attachment in his left eye, who wore the same cloak. He smiled and gestured to the chairs in front of him. "Please sit." "Thank you, Yahiko-sama," the ponytailed one said. "What is our current problem? I'm sure I can settle it with my art, yeah." The redhead next to him shook his head. "Ignore him, Amekage-sama. Through my inner circle along with Jiraiya-sama's I have heard your son's team have made it to the last round of the Chunin exams in Konoha. Congratulations and celebrations are in order, I believe." Yahiko grinned. "Thank you Sasori. I believe you are right, a celebration will be held after their return. Deidara is right however, I do have a mission for the 2 of you. Rumors of chakra armor that can repel any attacks are being manufactured in Yukigakure. You 2 are to engage in a specific test to see if the armor can hold against your abilities. Afterwards, I will need a full report. If necessary, use only up to C3, Deidara." The 2 rose and bowed, replying simultaneously, "Hi, Amekage-sama." "Dismissed," he said but added as an afterthought, "Before you leave, try and send a messenger bird to the Immortal Brothers, tell them to execute the next part of their mission, and their contacts will meet them in Nami no Kuni. Now you are dismissed, and remember Deidara, C3 only." Deidara grinned and nodded. "Hi Yahiko-sama. My art will test the armor with a bang, Sasori rolled his eyes before pulling a scroll from his back and summoning one of his puppets and entering it, covering it with a cloak and hat. He bowed once again before saying, "At your leave, Amekage-sama." Yahiko waved his hand dismissively as he was already back at work against the paperwork. Nearly 2 hours later, a toad the size of a small table appeared in his office, and Jiraiya was sitting atop it. Yahiko grinned and stood from behind his desk to greet his sensei. "Hiro-sensei," he said, earning a groan from Jiraiya. The toad sage looked at him with a scowl. "Aki, is that name still necessary?" he asked his student. "I mean, after all, Naruto calls me his Hiro Jiji." Yahiko's grin only widened. "Well, I should call you Hiro Tusen, then, eh?" At Jiraiya's face fault, Yahiko burst into laughter before helping his sensei up and offering him a drink in the village's shinobi bar. They left the Amekage tower with Yahiko informing the secretary that he would be out for a while. The secretary nodded and the 2 left, conversing on the one important subject Jiraiya was charged with keeping an eye on. Naruto. "So how is little Rito doing?" Yahiko asked as he waved to another shopkeeper that had bowed to him. Jiraiya grinned. "Well's got that Mitarashi woman gunning for his pants, and he has a no-relationship with a Kumo Jinchuriki by the name of Yugito," Jiraiya said. Yahiko laughed and shook his head. "Poor kid. If anything, he's going to be raped before he makes 15, muttered the Amekage. Jiraiya smiled perversely before pulling his notepad out. He grew concerned however when the notepad's papers all tore away and started swirling around him. As the papers started closing on him, Yahiko turned over his shoulder and smiled. "Hey Ko-chan," he said affectionately as she walked over to the 2 spiky-haired males. Konan smiled sweetly at her husband of 9 years before turning a glare on her sensei. "Sensei," she said, "if you dare to include Naruto-kun in any of your work." "What?" "PHHT. Like I would do that," Jiraiya said, trying to blow off the fact he would indeed use his godson in one of his stories again. Both of the amorphins present rolled their eyes and continued walking and discussing Naruto's growth. Entering a restaurant, as Konan scolded Yahiko for trying to get a drink while on duty, they were seated at a table reserved for them, and Jiraiya pulled out a file labeled Uzumaki Aim, Naruto, and set it before the boy's adoptive parents. "Turns out he's only had to rely on Taijutsu so far," Jiraiya said as Yahiko went over the report the Hokage had written up. "His teammates have managed to keep him out of trouble, but you're going to have to pay 1500 ryo for a wall Ryu broke when Uchiha Sasuke tried to start a fight." Konan frowned. "That's Itachi's younger brother, right? The one Madara left alive when he framed Itachi for the massacre." Jiraiya nodded. Apparently Madara wants Sasuke as his apprentice, or so my informant say, and plans on having him unlock his Mangekyou through killing Itachi. Apparently, he went after Itachi before and failed. It'd be killing two birds with one stone if he managed to get a hold of Sasuke. Yahiko growled, that monster's hypocrite. Starting a bloodline war in Kiri and trying to take control of one of the top 3 Dojutsu by killing his own Wat turns a person into such a sick fuck. Yahiko. Konan exclaimed in shock of her husband's vulgar language. That's not all, Jiraiya continued, he's also trying to acquire the locations of all the Jinchuriki for reasons unknown. He hasn't found trace of Naruto yet, seeing as the Konoha Council legally declared him dead. Wood snapped as Yahiko accidentally broke a piece of the table off after Jiraiya finished that sentence. Konan put a hand on his arm in reassurance and he visibly relaxed. A waiter approached, slightly afraid, but Yahiko apologized and promised he would pay for the repairs. The waiter left after also getting them a new table and an order of drinks. Yahiko looked back to his mentor with the eyes of a worried father. You're sure? He asked, 100% sure he doesn't have a clue Naruto's alive. At Jiraiya's nod, Yahiko released a breath and rested his head in his hands whilst praying silently to Kami to protect his son. Konan still had a look of worry directed to her sensei, who smiled at her and put a hand over hers. We'll keep him safe, Konan, Jiraiya said in his fatherly tone, no harm will come to Naruto under Akatsuki's watch. As we speak, Nagato, Kisame and Itachi are keeping watch over him. You know Itachi loves Naruto like a brother, and Kisame considers him one of the few worth his protection due to his heritage. And Nagato wouldn't let anything happen to his nephew. Konan smiled as she wiped a few stray tears from her eyes and nodded, I hope you're right Sensei, we're going to the finals though. Right, Hiko-kun. Yahiko nodded firmly, a determined look on his face and said, if the old man's in trouble we'll help him, I refuse to lift a finger to help the villagers, though. Sarutobi's lucky I've forgiven him. Jiraiya smiled. He didn't hold his home village in his heart as high as he used to, preferring Amegakure to Konohagakure, as the former didn't have bigots who feared the return of a demon that was successfully trapped in the Aim Prince's body. Hearing Yahiko admit that he'd help his sensei did cheer up the atmosphere however. If Orochimaru was going disguised as the Kazukiage, as the Kazukiage told him from a safe house in Aim, then he was definitely targeting his sensei. He smiled at the two orphans before him, happy the will of fire hadn't extinguished, but moved from Hai no Kuni to Arashi no Kuni. Their drinks arrived and Jiraiya held his glass up to the will of fire, may it forever burn through the next generation. To the dreams of our children, proposed Konan. To the end of the tears, Yahiko said softly. The three clinked their glasses together and drank them down before returning to the tower and planning Operation Konoha's defense. It was a week later, at the stadium in Konoha where Sarutobi greeted and welcomed the Kazukiage, Reikage, and Amekage to his village. Each cage was joined by 2 guards. Sarutobi had Jiraiya and Tsunade along with Shizune standing behind him. The Reikage A was joined by his brother Kurabi and Nai Samui. The Kazukiage was accompanied by 2 Jonin dressed in desert brown shrouds, and the Amekage, Yahiko, was joined by Konan and Nagato. Nagato was wearing his custom shades to hide his Rinnegan from Orochimaru. I can't wait to see how your prized Uchiha does against my son, Hokage Dono, the Kazukiage said. The Hokage chuckled. Who cares about the Uchiha? I said from his spot, according to my brother, little Ruto is in the exams. The kid always knows how to excite a crowd. Yahiko smiled, it's good to see Kumo still holds my son in high regards, Reikage Dono. The smiled back at the Shodai Amekage, hell yeah I do. The little twerp managed to kick Kurabi's ass more than once when they sparred. Yo bro, that was a low blow. Kurabi said, insulted. The Aim and Kumonin present shared a quiet laugh as the Hokage stood to announce the beginning of the exams. Welcome honored guests to the 35th anniversary of the first Chunin exams. He cried, earning cheers from the crowd, it is here where we will find out who is worthy of becoming a Chunin for their respective village. As the Sandaime Hokage, I hereby declare the examinees immune to the Neutral Ally Act put in place by the Nidaime Hokage. Now, let's begin the finals. After a war of approval from the crowd, Yahiko leant forward and said, a good speech, old man. Looks like you've still got it. You should just stay in office until death. Are you kidding me? Replied Sarutobi with a look of horror on his face, I can't wait to retire again. I might even move to Aim and get away from all these people. The horrors of paperwork strike again, murmured the Reikage. A collective chuckle was sent throughout the cage box, aside from the Suna guests, who were oddly quiet. In the competitor's box, Ryu was getting antsy. He kept looking around as he looked for his captain. Homozu smacked him over the back of the head, causing the white-haired man to glare at his teammate. What the hell? He hissed. Homozu looked at the right to where the Konoha genin were waiting. The Hyuga had a smirk on his face as he watched the white-haired Aim genin. Don't encourage him, Homozu whispered, if he wins by default, Taichu has truly lost. Yugito huffed as she looked around for a spot to sit in the stands. Her options were sitting next to the sickly-looking Hyuga and Inuzuka that Naruto had beaten, or sitting next to the two worthless Kunoichi that knocked each other out in the defense of fighting for true love. It may be best to sit with the lesser of two evils, kitten, Nibi whispered in her mind. Yugito sighed and nodded as she walked over to the spot where the Hyuga princess was sitting. Clearing her throat and gaining the attention of the two Konoha genin, she politely asked, "Is it alright if I sit here? I would like a good view of the matches, and this area has one of the better views." The Hyuga girl coughed slightly and nodded while the Inuzuka oogled her. She hissed at the dog that was growling at her, causing it to whimper. "Hey, what did you do to Akamaru?" demanded the Inuzuka. Yugito sighed. "I should sat with the fangirl," she thought. Before she could answer, a feminine voice spoke up. "Kiba, knock it off," a red-eyed woman said as she and the snake woman sat behind them. Yugito gulped as she realized the snake woman was smiling at her. "So," she said, "you're the one that's been taking my Foxy-chan's attention away from me." Yugito blushed beet red as the other's eyes landed on her. Kurenai was looking the Kumo girl over in amazement as she found her to be a rival for her own natural looks, whereas the Hyuga and Inuzuka had their jaws open, nearly touching the ground. "Why Yaoi were dating that fox-summoning loser?" the Inuzuka, Kiba, accused. Yugito growled. "If I remember correctly," she hissed, "Naruto-kun was the one that beat you using only Taijutsu." Kiba growled at the jibe, but bit back his urge to call her something rude. For one thing, she was from another village and he didn't know her reputation. And another, he really didn't want to know why Akamaru was so afraid when he was near her. "You're dating my Foxy-chan," Anko accused with a smirk. Yugito turned red once again as she turned back to face the arena. Anko leaned forward and whispered in her ear, "So is he as big as I think he is?" Yugito sputtered as she turned 7 shades of red and Anko laughed. Yugito tried to clear her head as she watched the arena floor. Kurenai chastised her friend quietly whilst Anko just smirked triumphantly, thinking to herself, "Ha. I've seen more of Foxy-chan than she has." The Senbon chewing shinobi walked out into the middle of the field and he looked to the competitor's box and said, "Will Hyuga, Neji and Uzumaki aim Naruto please join me on the arena floor?" Neji calmly walked down to the arena and smirked when a few minutes had passed and the blonde had yet to show. He turned to the proctor and said, "You might as well call the match. He has accepted his fate to lose to me," and he was cut off by the blonde's voice echoing through the arena. "Oh Sam. I came to play and I'm here to stay. Just listen to me or get out of my way. And now would be the time to do a YouTube search for I Came to Play by Downstate." The large waterspout with lightning shocking the ground near it hit the arena. The wind picked up and the audience all had to shield themselves with their arms. The Hyuga present all watched as the waterspout cleared and the blonde stood with a large blade strapped to his back. He was wearing his usual attire, including his jacket. He had a smirk on his face and made a few more hand seals before pointing to the sky and crying out, "Hyuten. Keiko no mirror. Ice release. Mirrors of the past." The audience watched as a solid cube formed a good 20 feet above the blonde. The cube was large, nearly 30 feet by 30 feet, and on it were images of the young Uzumaki performing his Taijutsu attack, the code breaker on Inuzuka Kiba, and him driving his knees into Neji's stomach, causing the Hyuga prodigy to fall to his knees. It also showed him training with several clones as he lifted weights and ran up the side of a building in Amegakure. Periodically, a moment in the footage would show Naruto standing in front of several lights and holding his hands up, 2 fingers pointing to the sky and a smirk on his face. Ihiko chuckled as he looked at the other cage's faces of shock and awe. The only few not surprised were Nagato, Konan, himself, Jiraiya, and Kurabi. The Kazekage clutched the arm of the chair in anger, causing Yahiko and Sarutobi to smirk. Kiba's pride felt utterly broken and he growled, "Freaking pricky, hope Neji kicks his ass." Hinata gasped, "Beat but K Kiba-kun." Kiba looked at Hinata and saw her glance over to the Hyuga box and his anger left him. He forgot what the blonde had done for his teammate and crush, along with humiliating the Hyuga prodigy. When he had first heard it from his teammate Shino, he didn't believe it, but when Hinata told him when they both visited her in the hospital, he felt a deep amount of respect and silently thanked the blonde genin. He turned his attention back down to the arena where Naruto was still smirking at Neji. "What was that bullshit about me accepting my fate?" he asked the Hyuga. Neji scowled and looked at the proctor. "Start the match so fate can be satisfied," he said. The Senbon chewing shinobi nodded and called out, "Hajime." Neji smirked to the blonde, "Fate has already decreed me the winner." Naruto cocked an eyebrow, "He did? When?" The Senbon guy just started the match, I think I would have heard him say, "Hyuga Neji is the winner." Or something like that. Neji's scowl returned and he settled into his Juukin stance, "I will prove to you that fate is no joking matter." Naruto smiled and pulled his blade off his back and stabbed it into the ground. Shrugging his jacket off, he hung it on the handle before rolling his shoulders and getting into a similar stance. The only difference was his palms were facing the ground and his 2 pointer fingers were bent halfway, pointing at the ground. Neji growled. You dare mock me? He questioned. The blonde laughed. Nope, this is the beginning stance of my taijutsu, Naruto informed him. You are going to be woken up by the might of my Kyoto-ken, my joint fist. Neji growled, I'll end this now. You're within my haki range. Naruto smirked, you want some, come get some. Neji activated his Byakugan and charged his fellow blonde, Haki Rakujian Sho. 2 strikes. Neji stabbed 2 of Naruto's Tenketsu, sealing them shut. 4 strikes. Another 4 were sealed. 8 strikes. Neji pierced 8 more Tenketsu. 16 strikes. Naruto grunted in pain as the strikes were finally getting to him. 32 strikes. Neji smirked as the blonde's face became pain-filled. 64 strikes. Naruto felt his chakra pathways just shut down, and he cried out in pain when Neji hit him with a final strike to his chest, sending him rolling backwards. Neji smirked as he deactivated his Byakugan and started walking away. The winner is, you finish that sentence and I'll castrate you. The blonde cried out from his spot on the ground. Everyone looked on in shock, aside from all AIM Shinobi, as Naruto rolled his legs over his head and kipped up back to his feet. Neji smirked again. You can't do anything, he said, I've sealed your Tenketsu. That impressive jump had to hurt a lot. Naruto chuckled, yeah, it sure hurt like a bitch. But, I know something you don't know. Neji cocked an eyebrow, oh? What's that? A smirk appeared on the blonde's face as he started to fade away, I was just a Rashi Bunshin. Neji's eyes widened as he activated his Byakugan and searched for the blonde, only to be struck in the back of the head, deactivating his Byakugan. He rolled forward and tried to reactivate his Taijutsu, only to cry out in pain and fall to his hands and knees. The audience all gasped as Naruto went back into his Taijutsu stance, it's time for you to wake up, Neji. It's time for your. He paused as he charged Neji and drove his knee into the side of the Hyuga's head. He used his right arm to grab Neji's head and then grabbed a hold of the Byakugan user's head with his left to secure a hold. He smirked as he cried out, reality check. He fell to his back, driving Neji's already throbbing skull into his own shoulder. The Hyuga prodigy groaned as he was shoved off Naruto's shoulder by the blonde. Naruto kipped up yet again and looked over to the Hyuga box. He smirked as he looked back to Neji and peeled a small seal-covered piece of paper off the back of the Hyuga's neck. He noticed Neji was looking at him through dazed eyes and heard him whisper, how? Fate thought. Naruto frowned. The Hyuga had more mental issues than he thought. He motioned for medics and knelt down beside him and removed Neji's head, ghosting his hand over the caged bird's seal. I know your pain of being sealed, Neji, he whispered, don't surround yourself with false beliefs, to be truly free, you must gain the support of friends. Think about that Neji, as you are healed. Think about ways to spread your wings and fly again. The medics arrived and put Neji on a stretcher, with Naruto giving Neji his head. Neji blinked at the blonde one last time before he was carried away. Naruto then noticed the people were clapping at the show of comradely. He smiled sheepishly as he scratched the back of his head and grabbing his jacket and blade before sunshining back to the competitor's box. His arrival was greeted by several nods of respect from the few Konohanins there, along with his friend's own congratulations. In the stands, a blue-skinned man smiled to his dark-skinned friend and said, heh, looks like the squirt finally found a way to seal off Taijutsus. You'd better watch out during your next spar. His friend smiled slightly and said, indeed I should. But you should as well. His mastery over his bloodline has increased dramatically, as we could see through his Arashi Bunshin. The blue-skinned man smiled, showing off his shark-like teeth, yeah, but if we do spar, it'll be a full-on Kenjutsu match. Speaking of which, after this we are heading over to Kiri to assist Zabuza and the Immortal Brothers, right? I believe Naruto-kun would be insulted by our lack of visitation, replied the black-haired man, besides, I would like to meet the girl he took out on a date a few nights ago. Said girl the mysterious man was speaking of was internally fighting a blush off her face as Nibi re-ran the match she had just seen through her head. Damn it, Nibi, stop. She thought, utterly annoyed by the Neko's actions. Oh big kitten, he looked so amazingly hot. And that last Taijutsu attack so bold, so strong, so electrifying, Nibi purred out. Yugito sighed as she tuned the cat out and focused on the real world, only to be brought to a near blush again. Did you see that, Nai-chan? Did you? Huh? Did you? Anko asked excitedly, he was so fast. He even deactivated the Byakugan with a paper seal. I think I might need to go down and congratulate him myself. Yugito growled and turned to face the snake woman to hiss out, you stay away from Naruto-kun. Anko grinned, or else I'll put you in a catatonic state along with keeping you away from him. Yugito growled to the older woman. Anko smiled sadistically and leaned forward. Just how far have you two gotten, She asked, earning a blush from the pale blonde, have you seen his rock hard, no scratch that, hard as steel abs? Have you gotten to trail your fingers over his well-toned legs? How about rubbing your body against his strong back? You done that yet, Yugito glared at the snake woman and hissed out, no. But now that I know you can get there, it's only a matter of time before I get there. Anko's playful smirk turned into a scowl, and she sat back in her seat and pouted, that was mean, Kumo-chan. I'm all for sharing Foxy-chan, I was just teasing you. Geez. Yugito blinked as she realized what the woman said, did you say share? Anko smirked, oh you didn't know. Well, it's not like he's telling everyone, but I found out through several sources that Foxy-chan is eligible for the Clan Restoration Act of the Elemental Nations. The Clan Restoration Act? Yugito repeated. Kurenai, Kiba, and Hinata all blinked before leaning forward for the rest of the conversation. Anko's grin never left her face, yup. Foxy-chan is eligible for several wives because of his bloodline. Don't go spreading the word though, I don't want Foxy-chan being swamped by a bunch of sleazy dressed whores. Yugito's sweat dropped as she held her tongue about telling the woman, who was clearly unstable, she just described herself. She ran over her knowledge of the Kra and gasped as she realized Naruto could already have several girlfriends back in his home village of Aim. She decided a quick visit to the competitor's box wouldn't be that much of a crime, as there was no rule against it. She excused herself from the group and left toward the box. Up in the cage box, the Hokage was rubbing his forehead as his councilman decided to pay him a visit. This is an outrage. Danzo cried, that boy is supposed to be dead. Mihiko growled as he clutched the arm of his chair, are you threatening my son, counselor? Danzo noticed that all of the Aim in the box were glaring at him, and while he used to know of Aim's every move thanks to his friend Hanzo, he had no clue what these new leaders were capable of. He recomposed himself and said calmly, no it's just, Uzumaki Naruto was declared dead due to his vanishing. But now that we know he is alive, we demand he be returned. Over my dead body. Konan cried out, having to be restrained by Nagato and Jiraiya. She snarled at the council members who were shocked at the way she reacted over the demon. Please, Amikage-sama, Homura said, you just need to know, the boy we speak of's a demon. The large amount of killer intent was coming from 3 cages, along with the people supporting them. The Raikage stood and walked before Homura and peered into his eyes. Are you calling my brother a demon? He said in a threatening tone. Homura's eyes widened as he shook his head. And no, sir, he said, it's just boy is the Kyuubi no Kitsune an Urk. Everyone was shocked as Jiraiya shoved a Rasengan into Homura's stomach, killing the man instantly. Jiraiya scowled as he shook his hand clean of the remains of the former councilman's stomach. He violated the third's law, Jiraiya explained, a law defended by death, if I recall correctly. The council members all began to call foul and claim Jiraiya had been corrupted by the demon, claiming the boy needed to be killed now. Yahiko had had enough. Silence. He cried out while flaring his chakra. The councilmen all became silent as the Amikage walked before them. Uzumaki Naruto died 9 years ago due to an attack made by villagers of this village, Yahiko said quietly, my son is not the boy you think he is, the child you can abuse and push around is dead and gone. He is now Uzumaki Aim Naruto, having taken my name upon my rise to Amikage. If you threaten his life again, I will pull all Aim shinobi from the exams and declare war on Konoha. The councilmen all gasped, shocked by such a threat. Before they could counter his threat, the Raikage spoke up, I will gladly assist Amegakure in the war and pull my own shinobi from the exams. I am sure my alliance with Iwa will also allow them to join the fight. The councilmen all paled. Maybe they could win against Aim, a newborn village with few shinobi, but to go to war with both Kumo and Iwa, 2 villages still sore over the outcome of the Third Great Shinobi War, would be suicide. The civilian councilmen all excused themselves and fled, whereas the clan heads all apologized for their actions and left calmly. Sarutobi smirked as he mentally thanked the Yondaime Raikage for coming to his grandson's aid. The cages all returned to their seats and awaited the next match. Will someone get that body out of here? The Hokage cried as the foul stench of his former teammate was starting to make him slightly sick. Isis very upsetting, thought the Kazukiage, who in actuality was the Shodai Otaka Orochimaru. The pale man was extremely upset things weren't going according to his plan. First, he had lost contact with Kabuto. The spy was needed for his plan to be effectively put into action, as he was the only one that could pull of the Jinjutsu needed for the first stage of the attack. Second, he had never expected Jiraiya and Tsunade to be attending the exams. Well, he partially expected Jiraiya, but Tsunade was another story entirely. He swore under his breath as he looked past the other 2 cages and looked the Amikage over. And of course the genin, he thought with a sneer as his eyes drifted down to the examinee's box, how was I supposed to know the demon child was alive, the son of the Amikage no less. Apparently he's as gifted in Fuinjutsu as the dope. While Orochimaru was lost in thought, Nagato was studying the Kazukiage's guards with his eyes. He saw 5 separate chakra pathways and narrowed his eyes. So that's what he's planning, thought the Rinnegan user, a shielding jutsu held up by 4 people at 5th, must be using a type of sibling feeding jutsu. Well, not on my watch you snake-skinned bastard. Naruto shook Amoy's hand as he left towards the arena. His opponent, the Nara, followed, muttering about having to fight someone who used a sword. Naruto shook his head and chuckled as he leaned against the railing and looked out the corner of his eye to glare at Gaara. The red-headed Jinchuriki was meeting his glare and his sand swirled angrily behind him. Naruto smirked and waved a two-finger salute as he turned around and walked towards the lounge where Homozu was meditating. "When do you think the attack will take place?" he asked the genius genin. Homozu opened his eye and looked at the blonde who was reclining on a bench and wrapping scrolls around two kunai. "Don't overwork yourself, Taichu," Homozu said, earning a chuckle from the blonde as he connected the two kunai with his chakra and started benching the improvised chakra bar. "I believe the snake will strike during his pawn's match." Naruto grunted as he lifted the bar for the 20th time. "So Pant, who do you think will win, Pant Amoy or the Nara?" Homozu stood and started spotting for the blonde. "Although Amoy-san is smart, I estimate his IQ to be around 185. Naras are remarkably notorious for being geniuses in strategy, their IQ averaging around 200 to 235. It will be a battle of the wits. Surely you left the fool to watch the fight, so we can learn the Nara's capabilities." Naruto grunted, doubtful. "If he's as smart as you say he Pant is, then he'd figured we've got a hidden agenda. He'll be saving energy for the upcoming battle he expects Pants and Amoy will be holding back. So it'll be a battle of the wits, alright, we've just gotta see who can withhold more, so my money Pant is on Amoy." Homozu held the chakra bar up so Naruto could take a breather. He became aware that there was someone standing behind him and turned to see the female Jinchuriki that had occupied his captain's mind. He smirked as a cruel joke came to mind and motioned for her to be quiet as he gave the bar back to the blonde. Naruto resumed benching, his eyes shut so he could keep track in his head. Yugito had walked to the competitor's box to find that Naruto was missing, inquiring where he was via Ryu. She went towards the lounge and found the blonde benching what seemed to be a makeshift bar made of two kunai and visible chakra, thus making it not only a physical exercise, but a control exercise as well. She looked at Homozu, who motioned for her to be quiet and then gestured for her to take his spot. As they walked past, Homozu slipped a piece of paper in her hands. As she read it, her face grew red and Nebi laughed in her mind. "Have fun," he says. Laughed the Neko. "Well, if he insists I'm sure our little Tom wouldn't mind a quick romp on the bench." "Nebi, that's not happening." Yugito thought as she looked down at the concentrated face of the benching blonde. He paused with his arms extended and grunted out, "Homozu halted." The Kumo Kunoichi quickly took a hold of the bar, almost dropping it due to its surprising weight. Naruto sat up and panted quietly as he removed his jacket, the sword she saw earlier nowhere in sight, most likely sealed away somewhere. He lay back down and reached up to grab a hold of the bar again when his hands brushed hers. Naruto froze when he felt soft fingers graze past his own, but shrugged it off, thinking Homozu had moved his hands away quicker than usual. Yugito however blushed at the contact and then berated herself for acting such a way over a boy. "Boy nothing. Do you see those pecs? Those belong to a man, kitten," Nebi purred, "and his arms look at how big they are, how they move with each bench small sheen of sweat, does make him look a hell of a lot hotter than before." "Damn it Nebi, stop," thought Yugito as she felt herself become warm in her lower regions because of the cat's words. This happened occasionally to the Neko Jinchuriki, but she'd find a way to distract herself from most thoughts, usually with training. As she got older, however, she found it became harder to fight the urges the demon inside her made her feel. She did discover how to kill the urges, through masturbation. She did it every now and again, whether she was at home or alone on missions, which was more often than usual. She'd put sealing slips on her doors to make sure no one would hear her. When she finished, you knew it. The Neko grinned cheekily as she sent her images of the blonde boy in front, her taking care of business. Naruto froze when he heard a small feminine moan from above him. He opened his eyes to see a red-faced Yugito biting down on her bottom lip, her green eyes locked on him. He blinked his confusion and was about to ask if he did indeed hear a moan when a scent hit him. His eyes widened as the fox woke up and started yelling at him. "Take her now. Prove your dominance over that feline bitch." Kyuubi barked out through his lust-clouded state, "Show her what kind of alpha male you are. Have you lost it?" Naruto thought as he dropped the bar to his right, sat up, and turned to face the blonde Kumo Kunoichi. They both looked at each other for a good few minutes, Yugito's red face darkening and Naruto growing concerned. He raised an eyebrow and cleared his throat. Yugi-chan, as much as I love this visit, are you okay?" Yugito made a small noise of surprise at his sudden words and nodded, not trusting her voice right now. "Why is she losing control, you ask?" A certain horny two-tailed demon cat has finally had enough of her container dancing around her feelings and was starting to take control. "Are you sure?" Naruto asked again, raising his hand and putting it on her forehead. "You're burning up." "Yugi-chan, what's wrong?" Yugito swallowed to clear her dry throat and said, "Why yeah, I'm fine. Don't worry about it, Naruto-kun." Naruto blinked at the affectionate suffix and smiled, "So I take it you came here to congratulate me on my awesome fight." Yugito nodded, that was definitely an interesting match. Why aren't you using jutsus, though? And that taijutsu technique where you drove your knee into the Hyuga's head, where did you come up with that? Naruto grinned and tapped her nose with his index finger, shame on you, Yugi-chan. Trying to get me to reveal my secrets to you. That's sneaky and I like it. Yugito blushed again before growling and smacking his hand away, knock it off, baka. I'm serious, tell me. Naruto crossed his arms and smiled smugly, make me. That did it for Yugito. In a fit of rage, and due to the slight loss of control over Nibi's chakra, she tackled Naruto to the ground with a war cry. Naruto yelped before grabbing her shoulders and trying to get the upper hand. They rolled around on the ground for about 10 minutes before Yugito was on top and slammed Naruto's back and head onto the concrete with a smirk. I win, she said, grinning victoriously. Naruto blinked a few times so he could allow his healing attribute to kick in before giving the Neko Jinchuriki a smirk. Okay, you won, he said before whispering hotly, now what are you gonna do with me, Yugi-chan? Yugito blinked and realized their positions before blushing. She made to get up before realization hit her. That sneaky bastardising my embarrassment to get out of this through his flirting well, two can play at this game, Uzumaki aimed Naruto. She smiled back at him and put a hand on his chest, that's a good question. I could always follow Nibi's advice and take you here and now. It was Naruto's turn to blush before he allowed a grin to cover his own face, yeah? I'd bet you'd like that, wouldn't you Neko-chan? Yugito smirked before leaning into Naruto's face and whispering, you'd be crying my name in seconds, Foxy-chan. Oh really? Who was the one that became flustered when I told you about Anko's little sightseeing adventures? Retorted Naruto. Yugito growled at the mention of the snake woman. Speaking of her, Yugito said, putting a fake pout on her face, she got to see more than men at fair, Naru-kun. I want to see more too. Naruto swallowed. It was one thing to call him by Anko's nickname for him, which he was used to, but to pout cutely and call him her own nickname poor, Naruto's little teenage mind couldn't handle it. And that's when Kyuubi took the wheel. He was sick of watching the kid dance around the goods in front of him with teasing and flirting. When he saw his chance to make something happen, you'd better believe he took it. Seeing through his Jinchuriki's eyes, he noted that Yugito was smirking at the younger blonde through half-lidded eyes and took action by influencing the boy to lean forward and press his lips to hers. Suddenly, Yugito felt her lips pressed against something soft and all the blood rushed from her head, causing her mind to short-circuit. Nibi was cheering inwardly whilst her poor, confused container was trying to comprehend the sensation she was feeling. It felt amazing, to say the least. Whatever her lips were pressed against, they were soft like shrimp, yet firm in the odd way her favorite food was. She relaxed into the kiss, her shock having left her, and followed her instincts for kissing back. Beneath her, Naruto was also just coming from his own La La Land and realizing the situation he knew his tenant had something to do with. He tried forming an angry thought but found he couldn't with the sensations and the feeling of happiness emitting from Yugito. Her lips felt like marshmallows against his and he melted into them. Whatever anger he felt towards the fox, well it was gone now and replaced with gratitude to the Kitsune King. Both blondes were now coming down from the high emitted from the kiss and were running low on air, causing them to, regretfully, separate. Naruto's face was bright red as was Yugito's, who slowly stood up and off of him. She held her hand out to help him up, which he gratefully accepted. They both stood awkwardly for a minute before Yugito became increasingly annoyed with the situation and said something. This is stupid, she said, earning another try not and hug me cause I'm adorable when I do this. Naruto head cock, I mean, not the kiss. The kiss was great, just we shouldn't be acting like this. I mean, I originally came down here to ask if you had any other girlfriends. Whoa, back up. Naruto said holding his hands up, you came down here to ask me if I had other girlfriends. Yugito swallowed and nodded, well he was talking to Anko and she told me you were eligible for the craw. Naruto groaned, great well I wasn't planning on making it public, but yeah. Wait he paused as a smile appeared on his face, was Yugi-chan jealous? Yugito blushed and replied defiantly, and no. Naruto grinned and leaned into her space, are you sure? Yugito growled, yes. Now back off. Naruto grinned as he started to walk past her to grab his jacket, alright. See you later kitten. Yugito growled again and smirked as an evil form of revenge appeared in her mind. As he bent over to pick his jacket up, she smacked him on the ass and said, see you later, Naru-kun. She left smirking as a bright red-faced Naruto stood frozen in the room, trying to get over the sudden feeling of molestation and arousal. Sarutobi smiled as he watched the match between the Kumo genin and the Nara. He turned to the Raikage and said, I must applaud your genin's abilities. Although Shikamaru is considered the laziest of the Konoha rookies, he definitely is the smartest. The fact that your genin, Amoy I believe, is putting him on the edge must mean he has his own talents at wits, no doubt due to your academic studies. The Raikage laughed, ha. I wish. All the smarts you see down there are due to the Amikage's son's friend Homozu. That kid is downright brutal when it comes to mind fucking, but I'll bet you saw that in the preliminary match. And don't try and say you weren't there, I got a letter from Karabi saying you were and telling me exactly what happened. I'll bet he did, chuckled the Hokage before he turned to Yahiko. I would like to meet this Homozu, Amikage Dono, he seems to be quite the smart lad. Yahiko smiled, thank you Hokage Dono. We take pride in the Homozu family and name, but alas, his clan is spread thin and far as civilians and con artists. We have Rudo-kun to thank for our Homozu becoming the genin he is today. It seems everything trails back to your boy, Amikage-san, hissed the Kazuki-age. Yahiko narrowed his eyes at the disguised snake. I'll admit Naruto-kun is the reason for most of our survival in aim, Yahiko said, but most of it came through a lot of hard work much like how the Yondaime Hokage put so much work into his jutsus that even the Sannin couldn't master, aside from his sensei of course. As the Kazuki-age fumed silently, Yahiko patted himself on the back for the witty jibe to the snake's pride. He diverted his attention back to the arena floor where he heard both genin announce a draw and quit. Yahiko wasn't surprised Nara had given up, having known about their reputation through Jiraiya, but Amoy's announcement did shock him slightly. He brooded in thought as he silently worried whether the Kumo team would be up to the task he assigns them, but quickly dashed those thoughts, knowing that if given the orders by either himself or Team Samui would follow these to the last degree. As the next fight was announced, Yahiko grinned as he recalled making Team Samui the first Kumo AIM team, along with Team Arashi, Naruto's team, the first AIM Kumo team, both having been sworn into the others' respective countries. Of course, the thanks went to Karabi for the idea, as he couldn't bear to never see his student again, one that understood his pain, and he in turn understood him. Omozu looked across at his opponent, who was standing across from him dressed in his usual green spandex outfit. He narrowed his eyes as the green-clad wonder landed with an added soft grunt of effort. His eyes trailed to the odd leg warmers around the legs and scoffed, well that's not fair. The large eye-browed teen blinked confused, I do not understand, my honorable opponent, what's not fair? If you hold back, Homozu explained, continuing, how's it fair that I have to fully exert myself while you can't go all out? He smirked as he noticed the look of uncertainty on his opponent's face and finished it off using his own words against him, it wouldn't be very youthful of you not to go full out. That was the last straw for his opponent, he pulled his warmers up and unhooked his weights. He looked at Homozu and asked, before we fight, I'd like to know your name. You can call me Homozu, replied the green-eyed genin, and yourself. Rock Lee, the green beast of Konoha. Rock Lee said with a smile, causing his teeth to sparkle. Homozu's sweat dropped and settled into his fighting stance. Lee dropped into a similar stance and smiled. Good luck, Homozu-kun, Lee said cheerfully. A tick mark appeared on Homozu's head. Oh poor Konoha genin. Bad move, Ryu said, wincing. Amoy nodded, earning a confused glance from the Suna Kunoichi. What's the problem? She asked. Ryu smiled at her. Oh, it's just that the Konoha Baka is going to die, Ryu said. The Konoha Jonin senseis present all gasped as the larger clone of the green-clad warrior below approached Ryu. What does that mean, my youthful friend? He asked. Ryu twitched. Firstly, started the hostile genin, someone get this freak away from me before I kill him. Kakashi then grabbed Mido Guy's arm and pulled him back towards the Konoha group. He narrowed his eyes at his relative but gestured for him to continue. Ryu grinned, looks like the copy nin does show up when he needs to. Where's the fag? Annoying Uzumaki. Nope, he ain't bugging me, Naruto said, walking into the room with a bowl of ramen in his hands. Ryu closed his eyes and counted to 5 before looking at the idiot he called his captain. You had to do that to go get ramen when I'm under strict orders from your mommy not to let you get any more. Exploded the white-haired genin. Naruto pouted and sniffled. That's mean, Ryu, he said, I was just molested by Yugi-chan, I need my comfort food. The blonde Suna Kunoichi blinked and cleared her throat, earning the two aims' attention, and said, so, why is he gonna kill the Konoha weirdo? Ryu smiled, simple. Everyone looked down to the arena where Homozu was bringing his hands together in a chop on Lee's ears, discombobulating him, and Ryu continued, he called him Homozu-kun. Homozu continued his onslaught as Lee was trapped in his genjutsu. The boy had entered into his chakra gates mode, which would have made him unbeatable had Homozu not expected this. Before the finals began, he constantly went to the library to research on his opponents from Konoha. The shinobi section was cut off, but from the way he hinged his headband to look like a Konoha genin, no one could tell the difference. He looked into the background of Team Guy, getting the basic information on them. He smirked when he found that his opponent couldn't use chakra, but immediately frowned when he realized he would excel into jutsu. He needed to strategize, which he did, and upon doing so, he discovered a book on Konoha Genjutsu. Now, seeing how his family excelled at jutsu understanding, rivaling the Uchiha's own understanding of it, he took to Genjutsu instantly. He had even created this Genjutsu himself. Its purpose was not to target the chakra of the body, but to target the energy of the mind, wrapping it in a dream. The current dream was of Lee fighting the Tsunade Jinchuriki, Gaara, whom Homozu was sure would make Lee go all out before he inevitably lost. Jinchuriki weren't those that were easily defeated, as he learned through watching many of Naruto's fights. He was now executing part 2 of his plan. Immobilize. He had already distracted him and punched him square in the face, shattering the boy's nose. Homozu had then executed his discombobulating chop, followed with a punch to the ribs. After that came the fracturing of his left jaw and the breaking of the ribs he had cracked. He then attacked the solar plexus of Rock Lee and then dislocated his jaw completely. Homozu finished him off with a jumping heel kick to the stomach, knocking both the wind and consciousness out of the Konoha genin known as the Green Beast. Winner, Homozu. Naruto and Ryu cheered, as did Amoy. The three then applauded the green-eyed genius when he returned to their box. It was the slow clapping from a certain black-clad Konoha genin that stopped the congratulations. "Not bad," Sasuke said, "for a loser. I mean, sure, you beat Rock Lee. Whoopty-flip-Hindu. But, you still haven't faced an Uchiha. So aim still sucks in everyone else's eyes." Homozu grabbed Naruto's shoulder before the blonde could retaliate the comment made by the angsty Uchiha. Naruto glared daggers at the genin for the jibe to his home. He snarled and shook Homozu's hand off his arm and stormed over the smug-looking Uchiha. "At least my Nai-san didn't kill my parents," Naruto hissed. Sasuke's eyes suddenly narrowed and he cocked his fist back. Naruto let a small smirk appear on his face. He counted the seconds down until the fist would fly at his face. "Uchiha Sasuke and Sabaku no Gaara report to the arena floor," the proctor announced. The Uchiha dropped his cocked fist and glared at the blonde in front of him. As he walked past Naruto to the stairs, he looked at the smug smiling blonde that hadn't turned away from his previous position. Sasuke muttered, "When we meet in battle, I'll kill you for that remark." Naruto's smile widened as his eye flashed red beneath his shadowed bangs and replied, "Go win your fight so you can make out with your fangirls." Sasuke looked bristled as he walked down to the arena. Gaara turned to Naruto with a smirk that could make Charles Manson and Ted Bundy recoil in terror. Okay, odd comparison, but two of the most well-known serial killers comparing to the first Gaara we mediated say they'd do that. He spoke quietly, "Don't let that waste of flesh kill you, Uzumaki aimed Naruto. I would hate to lose the chance of letting mother taste your blood." "Good luck to you too, Gaara," Naruto said sarcastically. The Tsunade Jinchuriki vanished in a sand shunshin to the arena ground. Naruto went back to the arena floor and looked up at the cage box. Amoy, Homozu and Ryu all followed his gaze and steadied themselves. As the proctor called for the match to begin, an explosion erupted from the cage box. "Now!" shouted Naruto. Instantly, he, Homozu, Ryu and Amoy had leapt down to the arena. The four of them surrounded Gaara. Sasuke looked livid and he looked around to see Aim and Kumo nins assisting Konoha nins as they fought Odo and Suna shinobi. He looked up at the proctor who smirked. "Hey!" he shouted, earning the proctor's attention, "What the fuck is going on here?" The proctor pulled a kunai out and threw it at an incoming Suna shinobi, who died from the attack. The Senbon chewing man grinned and turned back to the Uchiha and said, "Exams cancelled, kid. We're under attack, Kumo and Aim are assisting us. These four have Gaara under control, go report to your sensei." But Sasuke started, interrupted by the Jonin. "I said move genin." He shouted as he charged the Suna sibling sensei with his kunai. Sasuke glared at the blonde who was now dodging the sand attacks of his opponent. He reluctantly ran back to where he last saw his sensei without looking back, lest he injure his pride any further. Up in the cage box, Saratobi was fighting Orochimaru with the assistance of Tsunade and Jiraiya. Yahiko, Konan and Nagato were all busy with three of the Odo four, the white-haired twin Seiken and Yuden, and the spider-like Kidomaru. Samui of Kumo had left to assist with evacuating civilians and nobility, whilst the Reikage and Karabi fought the red-headed foul-mouthed Taiya and the large Yorobo. "Damn it!" Yahiko shouted as he avoided another arrow from the spider freak. He glared at the smirking six-armed man and tore his cage robes away, leaving him in his Aimanbu attire, similar to what Homozu wore, aside from the large blade now protruding from his back. Nagato and Konan had ditched their cloud-covered cloaks and were dressed in the same manner as their cage and friend. Nagato had also chosen to lose his glasses, glaring at Yuden with his Rinnegan. What the heck's wrong with his eye, bro?" Yuden asked his older brother. Seiken shrugged and smirked at Konan. "Who gives a fuck?" he asked. Nagato smirked and raised his left hand and pointed at Yuden. "Shinra Tenshi," whispered the Rinnegan user. Yuden was suddenly flung several feet away and felt like he was hit by an avalanche. He tried to sit up but failed as he saw the rippled eyes of Nagato looking down at him with a smirk and his palm open, this time shouting, "Shinra Tenshi." Yuden was sent through several floors of solid concrete. Seiken turned when he felt the pain his brother was put through, and it was then Konan summoned her chakra paper to cocoon him. She extended her hand and said, "Pipami aso." Paper coffin. Seiken felt himself become crushed and he cried out in agony. His pained cry alerted Kidomaru to their situation, and the Spider-Man thought, son of a bitch, this plan is all shot to hell. Why doesn't Orochimaru-sama just pull out? Focus on me, bug face. A voice cried out, gaining Kidomaru's attention. The spider suddenly found a blade embedded in his left middle arm and started cursing profoundly. He fell clutching his now stabbed arm, and Yahiko rested his longsword on his shoulder after pulling it from the man-spider's arm. He sneered at the man, this is the best Orochimaru has to offer. Pathetic. Kidomaru growled and activated his curse mark with a smirk, we've only just begun, asshole. Yahiko cursed as he settled back into a stance with his blade facing his now mutated opponent and let a nervous grin appear on his face, bring it on, spider freak. I'll bet I can get a few of those arms of yours off. Konan and Nagato were now faced with curse mark covered Seiken and Yuden. They settled back into a stance and continued their fight for Konoha, whilst down below, Naruto and his friends were facing a new problem. Ah! Ryu cried out as he and his blade were forced back by Gaara's ultimate defense. Currently, the red-headed Chunin was hiding in a large sphere made of sand. No matter what Ryu or any of the others did, no one could break through it. Ryu twirled his shinai agitatedly in his left hand before making several one-handed hand seals. Hai no Burrito. Blade of fire. He cried out. Ryu clutched his shinai in both hands, the blade glowing red upon his touch, and he charged the sand shield. He made an upward slash, turning a good percentage of it into glass from the heat of his attack. Ryu leapt away and made another set of one-handed seals before exclaiming, Hunuken, flame fist. He cocked his left hand backwards and it ignited with flame. He then punched in the direction of the glass, sending a large fireball in the shape of the fist at the revealed area, causing it to shatter and the red-headed boy's sadistic smile to become visible, along with a good portion of the boy's body. You failed, fool. Gaara cried, now die. Sand covered the small hole Ryu made and then more sand shot out at the silver-haired genin. His eyes widened and he brought his arms up to defend his face from serious damage. He was then enveloped in a large cocoon of sand. A sand eyeball appeared above the sphere containing Gaara. It followed the movements of Amoy as he slashed the tendril connecting the coffin with the sphere. Ryu fell from the coffin, hacking and gasping for air. Naruto looked at Amoy and said, get him medical attention. Now. Homozu and I will deal with Gaara. Hi, Taichu. Amoy replied, helping Ryu up and pulling his arm over his shoulder as they leapt away. Naruto looked over to Homozu, and Homozu nodded. They both unsealed their own weapons. Naruto was now holding his large Zanbatsu, a gift from his friend and sensei Mamachi Zabuza, one of the former 7 swordsmen of Kiri. His Zanbatsu looked like a large longsword, with a similar make to Yahiko's, the main difference was the size of the blade. You could tell from looking at it that you required a lot of strength to swing it. Engraved on the blade was the kanji for Sword of the Storm God, it allowed Naruto to flow his bloodline abilities through it. He hoisted it onto his shoulder, glaring at the sand-eye defiantly. Homozu had pulled a large cleaver from a seal, it was at least 2 times the size of a normal cleaver. The blade was similar to Mamachi Zabuza's, the main difference between the two was the length, where Zabuza's blade was nearly a third larger than himself, Homozu's blade was a third shorter than he was. Engraved on and was the kanji for Homozu cleaver. It held no abilities like other Zanbatus usually did. Homozu charged Gaara to find the ugly mug of the puppet used by the Chunin in Kankuro. Kankuro smirked from his position and said, I believe you owe me an apology. Homozu blinked, unfazed, for what, cross-dresser? Not complimenting your makeup or not destroying this ugly thing you call a doll. Kankuro's face grew red and he replied, I was only going to maim you, but now you're going to die for insulting Karasu. Homozu back-flipped away from the puppet and narrowly avoided a swarm of Kekai insects swarming him. Instead they swarmed around the puppet and Kankuro. Homozu turned to see the Aburum standing next to him. The Aburum spoke softly yet strongly, our villages are fighting together and as I have observed, your captain may need some assistance. Go. I will hold off this cross-dresser. Homozu nodded in thanks and went back to assist his captain. He watched as Naruto settled into a stance where the blade pointed towards its target. In this case, the sphere that contained Gaara. His legs were set and ready to run, but through Homozu's trained eyes, he could see and sense the chakra of the Kyuubi channeling to Naruto's feet. Homozu then heard a quiet chant amongst the chaos and turned to see the Suna Kunoichi hiding behind her battle fan, most likely performing hand seals. He narrowed his eyes as he charged his target. The Mari was interrupted as the green-eyed aim genin slashed through the battle-ready paper of her fan. She pulled the fan back and folded it to deflect another attack made by the aim genin. She growled as she used her folded fan to swing back at the aim. Homozu ducked under her swing by bending a whole 90 degrees at his knees. He saw the disbelieving look on the Kunoichi's face and smirked as he twisted and kicked upwards with his left leg, hitting her square in the jaw. She stumbled backwards, clutching her mouth. Homozu rolled forward and then turned to face her, his cleaver ready for a fight. Naruto kept focusing the chakra into his feet and blade. His vision was becoming blurred as he could only focus on the sphere that held Gaara. He knew this attack was lethal, but only to non-Jinchuriki. Gaara would no doubt survive, but just barely. He closed his eyes, reopening them as they flashed electric blue. Before disappearing in a flash of blue, he cried out, "Boruto da!" Bolt strike. Gaara blinked as he felt a flash of something overcome him. He touched his chest and slowly brought his hand up to examine the liquid that was on his chest. He sniffed it and froze when the familiar scent hit him. He started breathing heavily as he clutched his hand in the other hand. The fights in the arena all came to a stop as a blood-curdling shriek echoed throughout the arena. Naruto froze as he looked over at Homozu, who was frozen in his tracks. Naruto took this moment to talk to his tenant. "Hey Kyuubi." "What kit?" asked the fox. "Would something bad happen if, oh, I dunno say the Ichibi's container was injured?" Naruto asked, praying silently as he saw the sand sphere start bubbling and spiking. "Well, based on the stability of the container, I'd say he'd lose it and transform into his strongest form. You injured that Gaara kid, didn't you?" Kyuubi asked, deadpan. Naruto mentally smiled sheepishly. Whoops, he thought, ignoring the sudden barrage of scolding the fox sent his way. Naruto scowled and tightened his grip on his blade. He narrowed his eyes as he saw a large raccoon start to form from the sphere of sand. He watched, amazed, as the raccoon kept growing and growing. He slowly backed up and blocked the screams and cries of terror from the fleeing civilians. He berated himself for allowing the full transformation to take place smack dab in the middle of the village. Kyuubi?" Naruto asked aloud, not caring who heard him. "What now, kit?" the increasingly annoyed Fox King asked. Naruto swallowed as the sand raccoon roared to the sky and then settled its gaze on him. "Little help?" Naruto asked as a large claw made of sand charged towards him. He was frozen in spot and looked down only to curse aloud as two small piles of sand held him in place. He looked back up at the claw and raised his blade to defend himself. He could only watch as the claw came at him in an immense speed.